She's too old, too plain, and too proud for a man like Cole Whitaker. Margaret Caldwell announced loud enough for the whole platform to hear, just as Eleanor Bennett stepped off the stagecoach. One small suitcase in her hand, dust on her boots, and her chin lifted like she'd heard every word. She had. Eleanor didn't flinch. She didn't look away. She found the woman's eyes held them for one long, quiet second, and walked straight past her without a single word. The silence she left behind was louder than anything Margaret could have said. If you're already hooked, subscribe to our channel and follow Eleanor's story all the way to the end, and drop a comment telling us what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story has traveled. The stagecoach had been 6 days out of St. Louis. Eleanor Bennett had spent most of those 6 days wedged between a traveling salesman who smelled of cheap tobacco and a young mother with twin boys who couldn't sit still for longer than 10 minutes. She had not slept more than a few hours at a stretch. She had eaten dry biscuits and jerked beef and drank water from a canteen that tasted faintly of rust. Her dress was wrinkled beyond saving. Her hair, which she had pinned up carefully at the start of the journey, had given up its arrangement somewhere around the Kansas border. She did not care about any of that. What she cared about was what waited at the end of the line. Willow Creek, Wyoming territory. Population just under 400. Home to Whitaker Ranch, the largest cattle operation in the Northern Territory. And home to Cole Whitaker, a man she had never met, whose letter had reached her 3 months ago through a matrimonial agency in St. Louis, and whose words had been so plain, so unadorned, so completely devoid of flattery, that she had read them 4 times before she understood they were actually a proposal. I need a wife who can work. I don't need pretty. I don't need young. I need someone with sense enough to help run a household and honest enough not to pretend she's something she's not. If that description fits you, write back. Eleanor had laughed out loud. Alone in her small boarding house room, she had sat on the edge of her narrow bed and laughed until her eyes were wet, not from sadness, but from the sheer strange relief of being wanted for something real. She wrote back the same evening. It fits me. I'm 31 years old. I've been called an old maid so many times I've started using it myself. I can manage accounts, organize a household, tend livestock, and cook a meal that won't kill you. I'm not pretty in the way men usually mean it, but I've been told I'm dependable, which I consider the better compliment. If that's what you need, I'm what you're looking for. Cole Whitaker's reply arrived 12 days later. It was 4 sentences long. Good. Come in April. I'll send train fare and stage money. Don't bring more than you can carry yourself. That was it. No poetry, no promises. No pretty words about destiny or fate, or God's plan bringing 2 souls together. Just 4 blunt sentences from a man who seemed to have no interest in wasting words on things that didn't matter. Eleanor had packed 1 suitcase. She had left St. Louis without telling most people where she was going. The ones she did tell had reacted with a predictable mixture of pity and alarm. Her landlady, Mrs. Potts, had grabbed both her hands at the door and looked at her with the expression people reserve for the terminally ill. Eleanor dear, a mail-order arrangement at your age. At my age, Eleanor had said pleasantly, I can make my own decisions without asking anyone's permission. Goodbye, Mrs. Potts. Her cousin Harriet had been worse. You don't even know what he looks like. He could be horrible. He could be cruel. He could be any number of things. Eleanor had agreed. So could I. That makes us equal. She had walked out before Harriet could find another objection. Now jolting through the last miles of Wyoming Territory Road, with dust coming through every gap in the stagecoach boards, Eleanor watched the landscape through the window and felt something she hadn't felt in years. Possibility, not hope. Hope was too fragile, too easily broken. She had stopped leaning on hope somewhere around her 27th birthday, when the 3rd man she had considered marrying had chosen a 19-year-old with a pretty smile and a wealthy father instead. Not bitterness either. She had burned through. Bitterness already used it up like firewood in a long winter. What she felt now was quieter than both of those things, steadier. I am going somewhere new. Whatever happens there, it will not be the same as what happened before. That alone is enough. The stagecoach lurched to a stop. Willow Creek, the driver called down from his box. End of the line. Eleanor was the last one off. She picked up her suitcase, straightened her spine, and stepped down onto the platform and walked directly into the collective stare of what appeared to be approximately half the town of Willow Creek. They were not subtle about it. A cluster of women near the church steps, several men leaning against the livery post, children peering around their mothers' skirts, and in the center of all of it, holding herself like she owned the platform, a woman in a wine-colored dress with jet buttons and hair that had clearly been arranged by someone who charged for the privilege. Margaret Caldwell. Eleanor didn't know the name yet, but she understood the type immediately. The kind of woman who decided what a town thought before the town had a chance to think for itself. Margaret looked her over from boot to hairpin, a slow, deliberate inspection that made no attempt to disguise what it was, and then turned to the woman beside her and spoke at a volume calculated to carry. She's too old, too plain, and too proud for a man like Cole Whitaker. The words landed clean and clear on the warm spring air. Eleanor heard every syllable. She stopped walking. She found Margaret Caldwell's eyes across the platform. Light gray eyes, pretty and cold as creek water in November. And she held them for exactly one long, unhurried second. Then she walked straight past her without a word. She heard the murmur that followed. She felt the eyes tracking her. She kept walking. If I stop to explain myself to every person who has already decided what I am, I'll spend the rest of my life standing still. She was 10 feet past the crowd when a voice cut through the noise, low, direct, no decoration on it. Miss Bennett? She turned. He was tall. That was the first thing she registered. Tall and lean, with the kind of build that came from decades of actual work, not performance. Dark hair with the first threads of gray at his temples. A jaw that looked like it had been cut rather than grown. He wore a plain brown coat, worn at the elbows, and boots that were clean but not new. Cole Whitaker was not a handsome man in any magazine sense of the word. He was weathered. His eyes were gray-green and slightly narrowed, as though he'd spent so many years reading distance that he'd forgotten how to look at something close. He was looking at her now, directly, without the pity or the amusement she'd seen on every other face on that platform. "That's me," Eleanor said. He nodded once. His eyes moved briefly to her suitcase, then back to her face. "That all you brought? You said don't bring more than I can carry." Something moved at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile, more like the memory of one. "Wagons out front," he said. "We've got 2 hours of road before dark." He took her suitcase before she could object, not with any ceremony, just picked it up and turned toward the street as though the matter was settled. Eleanor followed him, and as she did, she heard Margaret Caldwell's voice floating after them like a scent. "That poor man. He's going to regret this within the month." Eleanor did not turn around. Cole didn't either. But something in the set of his shoulders told her he had heard it. And something in the fact that he kept walking told her all she needed to know about how much weight he gave that woman's opinions. Good, Eleanor thought. We already have something in common. The wagon ride was mostly quiet. Eleanor had braced herself for the awkward performance of two strangers trying to seem comfortable with each other. The careful questions, the polite fictions, the exhausting work of pretending that sitting next to a person you'd never met and had agreed to marry wasn't wildly strange. Cole Whitaker apparently had no interest in that performance either. He drove. She sat beside him. The territory stretched out around them in every direction, huge and amber and indifferent, and the only sounds were the horse's hooves and the creak of the wagon, and somewhere in the distance, a hawk calling once and then going quiet. After about 20 minutes, Cole spoke. "You manage accounts, you said in your letter." "I did." "Double-entry ledger." "Yes. I worked for a dry goods business in St. Louis for 4 years. Before that, a grain merchant. I know my way around a set of books." He was quiet for a moment. "Ranch hands get paid every 2 weeks. Payroll's currently a mess. My foreman's good with cattle, not so good with numbers." "I can fix that." House needs work. Last woman who ran it left 3 years ago. What happened to her? She died. He said it without particular weight but without coldness either, just fact. My mother ran this place better than anyone I ever hired. After she was gone, I let some things slip. Eleanor looked at him. I'm sorry about your mother. He glanced at her briefly. She'd have liked you. It was such an unexpected thing to say that Eleanor had no immediate response. She turned it over in her mind while the road unrolled ahead of them. You don't know me well enough to know that, she finally said. She liked people who didn't make a fuss. He kept his eyes on the road. She'd have liked that you didn't say anything to Margaret Caldwell back there. I almost did. What stopped you? Eleanor considered the question honestly. I decided she wasn't worth the breath. This time Cole actually smiled, brief and crooked there, and gone like a match struck in wind. Yeah, he said. That's exactly what she would have said. They rode the rest of the way in silence, but it was a different quality of silence than before. Easier, more like two people thinking alongside each other than two strangers performing discomfort. Eleanor watched the land. She watched the way the light changed as the sun dropped. She watched a hawk, maybe the same hawk, riding the thermals above a long ridge to the west. By the time Whitaker Ranch came into view, she had already started making a list. Mumlet. The house was large and badly organized. That was Eleanor's assessment within the first hour of walking through it. The rooms were big and the bones were good solid construction. Sound floors, windows that actually let in light. But 3 years of a man living alone in a space that had been designed for a family had left their mark. Supplies stored in the wrong places. Books mixed with equipment catalogs. A kitchen that had been rearranged by someone who cooked by necessity rather than by logic. She said none of this out loud. She simply walked through each room with her eyes open, making mental notes, watching how the household moved around her. The housekeeper, a stout German woman named Mrs. Gruber, who had clearly been hired for endurance rather than warmth, followed her with the expression of someone waiting to be criticized. Eleanor smiled at her. The kitchen gets good morning light, she said. Mrs. Gruber blinked. Yes, that's wonderful for baking. My old kitchen faced north. I never had enough light. Something in Mrs. Gruber's posture shifted almost imperceptibly, but Eleanor had spent 31 years learning to read small signals. I make good bread, Mrs. Gruber said carefully. I'd love to learn your method, Eleanor said, if you're willing to teach me. By the time Cole knocked on the kitchen door frame to say supper was ready, Mrs. Gruber was showing Eleanor where the good flour was kept and explaining in detail her mother's recipe for black bread. Cole looked at the two of them standing side by side over the flour barrel and said nothing. But Eleanor caught something in his expression, brief, unguarded, that looked almost like relief. Supper was served in the kitchen. Just the two of them, Mrs. Gruber having gone home to her own house nearby. Cole ate with the focused efficiency of a man who had spent too many years eating alone to remember that meals could be social occasions. Eleanor ate with genuine appetite. She was hungry. It had been a long day, and Mrs. Gruber's chicken was excellent. Tell me about the ranch, Eleanor said when the silence had stretched long enough that it had stopped being comfortable and started being avoidance. Cole looked up from his plate. What do you want to know? Everything. Start with the numbers. How many head of cattle, how many employees, what your quarterly revenue looks like, and what your biggest operating cost is. He stared at her. What? She said. Most people who ask about the ranch want to know about the land, the history, how long the Whitakers have been here. Those are interesting things, Eleanor agreed. But they don't tell me if this place is going to be financially solvent in 5 years. The numbers do. Cole set down his fork. He looked at her with that slightly narrowed gaze, the one that seemed built for reading distance, and Eleanor had the distinct impression that he was recalibrating something. 1,800 head, he said. 32 full-time hands. Seasonal workers during roundup, usually another 20. Revenue was good last 3 years, but costs have been climbing. What kind of costs? Feed mainly. And I've been losing cattle to sickness more than I should be. Doc Paris thinks it's something in the south water supply, but I haven't had time to investigate properly. What does the supply contract look like for feed? 3-year contract with a merchant in Cheyenne, renews in September. Can I see the terms? He looked at her again. Tonight? Tomorrow is fine. You're not tired. I am tired, Eleanor said. But I'd like to know what I'm working with before I start working with it, if that's all right with you. Cole picked up his fork again. A pause. Then, I'll pull the ledgers in the morning. Thank you. They finished supper, in the more comfortable silence. Eleanor cleared the plates without being asked. Cole watched her do it with the look of a man who had not had someone do that in a long time, and wasn't sure how to feel about it. You don't have to do that, he said. That's what I pay Mrs. Gruber for. Mrs. Gruber is home, Eleanor said pleasantly. And I needed to know where the dishes go. She found where the dishes went. She filed the information away alongside the flour barrel and the kitchen light and the tension in the south pasture water supply. I am going to need to know this place completely, she thought. And knowing a place means starting with the small things. She was wrong about one thing. She had expected the ranch hands to ignore her, the way working men generally ignored women who were neither their wives nor their employers. They did not ignore her. They watched her, constantly, with the specific wariness of people who had already decided she was temporary and were waiting for her to confirm it by leaving. She had been at Whitaker Ranch for 4 days when she overheard 2 of them talking near the barn. She hadn't meant to overhear. She had come to look at the water trough situation Cole had described. She was trying to understand whether the contamination issue might be coming from an upstream source, and the 2 hands young men who clearly hadn't heard her approach were talking in the direct way that people talk when they think no one important is listening. 2 weeks, said the taller one. I give her 2 weeks before she's back on the stage east. Henderson gives her 3, said the other. I say less. Look at her, she's soft. City soft. She doesn't know the first thing about real ranch work. She's been out at the books every morning. So numbers aren't the same as work. Cole seems to think she's useful. A short laugh. Cole thinks anything that doesn't complain is useful. He'd think a fence post was useful. Eleanor stepped around the corner of the barn. Both men went rigid. The south water trough, she said without heat. Is the ground around it draining properly after rain, or does it pool? A long silence. Ma'am, said the taller one. Pooling water near a trough can introduce contamination from the soil surface. I'm trying to determine whether that might be contributing to the cattle sickness. Does water pool there after rain? The 2 men exchanged a look. Yes, ma'am, the shorter one said finally. Has done for the past 2 years, after we moved the fence line. Thank you. She turned to go, then stopped. And for what it's worth, I give myself considerably longer than 3 weeks. She walked back toward the house without looking back. Behind her, she heard the taller one say very quietly, She heard us the whole time. And the shorter one, yeah. Neither of them laughed. She brought it to Cole that evening. He was in the ranch office, a room off the main hall, with a desk buried under 3 years of imperfectly organized paperwork and a window that looked out over the north pasture. She knocked once and came in when he said to. The south water trough, she said. I think the ground pooling after rain is creating surface contamination. If we regrade the drainage slope and add a gravel filter around the base, it should address the issue without relocating the trough. Cole looked up from the papers he was reviewing. You think that's what's making the cattle sick? I think it's contributing. I'd want Doc Paris to confirm, but the timing you described the sickness starting 2 years ago lines up with when the fence line moved and the pooling started. He was quiet for a moment. That's a straightforward fix, he said. Most things are, Eleanor said, once you know what you're looking for. He looked at her. Not the assessing look from the wagon, and not the recalibrating look from supper on the first night. Something different. more direct. You work fast, he said. I've spent my whole life having to prove things quickly, Eleanor said. It's given me good habits. She set the notes she'd made on the desk. He looked at them, neat, organized columns in her compact handwriting. I'll have Johnson regrade that drainage tomorrow morning, he said. Good. She turned toward the door. Miss Bennet. She stopped. It's Eleanor. You can call me Eleanor. A pause. Eleanor. Her name in his voice was careful, like he was getting the weight of it right. Why did you really come out here? She turned back. He was watching her with that narrow, distance-reading gaze, and she had the sense this was a question he'd been holding since the stagecoach platform. She could have given him the careful answer, the diplomatic answer, the answer that sounded good and protected the parts of herself that were still healing. Instead, she gave him the true one. Because every place I'd ever been, I was already something before I arrived. Already too old, already too plain, already too independent, already not quite what anyone wanted. I thought if I went somewhere far enough away, I might get to arrive as just a person, before anyone decided what I was. Cole was quiet for a long moment. Did it work? He said. She thought about the platform, about Margaret Caldwell's voice, about two ranch hands giving her weeks. Not entirely, she said. But I think it might. She left him with that. In the hallway outside the office, she stood still for a moment with her back against the wall and exhaled slowly. Her heart was beating faster than she wanted. Not from fear, from something else. Something she didn't have a word for yet. Give yourself time, she told herself. Don't rush toward anything. Don't run from anything. Just work. Just be here. See what happens. She went to her room. She pulled out the ledger Cole had given her access to that morning and opened it on the desk by her window, and she went back to work. By the end of the first week, she had found 14 separate accounting errors. Not fraudulent ones, just the natural accumulation of a busy man trying to run a large operation without the administrative support it needed. Small misfiled entries, supply invoices charged to the wrong accounts, payments that had been made but not properly recorded, which made the cash position look worse than it actually was. She fixed them one by one, quietly, without announcing it. When she set the corrected ledger on Cole's desk on Friday evening, he sat down with it and spent nearly an hour going through it page by page. She sat in the chair across the desk and waited, watching his face. He went through it page by page. She watched his expression change from concentration to surprise to something that looked briefly like embarrassment. I had no idea the books were this far off, he said finally. They weren't badly maintained, Eleanor said carefully. They were maintained by someone who was doing 3 other jobs at the same time. The errors make sense given the circumstances. I was losing sleep over that operating deficit, he said. I thought we were in more trouble than... He stopped. You're not in trouble, Eleanor said. You're actually in a stronger position than the raw numbers suggested. Once the livestock sickness costs come down, which I think they will, after we address the water issue, you should see the margin improve significantly. Cole set down the ledger. He looked at her across the desk with an expression she couldn't entirely read, too many layers in it, too much happening behind those gray-green eyes. I'd like to show you the supply contracts tomorrow, he said. Get your opinion on the renewal terms. I'd like that, Eleanor said. She didn't say anything else. She didn't need to. But when she went back to her room that night, she sat on the edge of the bed and let herself feel something she had been carefully not feeling all week. Not satisfaction, not quite that. Something closer to belonging. I am useful here, she thought. Not tolerated, not pitied, not endured. Useful, genuinely, specifically useful. It was a thing that should have been small. A quiet, practical thing. It felt enormous. The letter from Margaret Caldwell arrived on a Tuesday. It was addressed to Cole, but Mrs. Gruber, who had by this point decided that Eleanor was acceptable company and had begun finding small reasons to share information with her, mentioned it at breakfast with the significance of someone delivering intelligence. A letter from Mrs. Caldwell. she said, setting it on the table. She sends letters regular, has done for 2 years. Eleanor looked at the envelope. Cream-colored good quality. Her name written in a slanted, confident hand. Is she a friend of Cole's? Eleanor asked. Mrs. Gruber made a sound that was not quite a word. She is a widow, very wealthy. People in town say she has intentions. She picked up her coffee cup with a meaningful air. She did not expect him to send for a wife. Eleanor picked up her own coffee and drank it thoughtfully. When Cole came in from the morning check and found the letter on the table, something shifted in his jaw, almost imperceptibly. But Eleanor had gotten good at reading small signals. He picked it up, held it for a moment, set it back down. You can read it? Eleanor said pleasantly. I'm not going to watch. He looked at her. I'm not making an accusation, she said. I'm just saying. You don't have to manage my feelings about your correspondence. I'm a grown woman. He stood there for a moment, holding the letter with the expression of a man who had been braced for a different kind of conversation and wasn't sure what to do now that he wasn't getting it. Then he set the letter aside entirely and sat down. What's the status on the Cheyenne supply contract? He said. Eleanor pulled out the notes she'd made. The renewal terms are unfavorable. The price per bushel has a built-in escalator clause that's going to cost us significantly more in year 2. I found a supplier out of Denver who's offering better terms on a 2-year commitment. Comparable quality, better price, and they're actually closer to us logistically. Denver's a newer operation. They've been running for 6 years. I've written to 3 ranches who've used them. I should have references back within the week. Cole looked at her notes. His finger moved down the column of numbers. You wrote to other ranches, he said. Is that all right? He paused. It's exactly what I would have done, if I'd thought of it. Now you don't have to, Eleanor said simply. He looked up at her. The letter from Margaret Caldwell sat unopened on the edge of the table between them. Neither of them mentioned it again. It was Margaret herself who forced the issue. She arrived at Whitaker Ranch on a Wednesday afternoon unannounced, which Eleanor would later understand was entirely intentional, driving her own buggy with the confidence of someone who had always considered this road hers to travel. Eleanor was in the kitchen going over invoices with Mrs. Gruber when she heard the buggy in the yard. She looked up. Mrs. Gruber looked at the window and then at Eleanor with an expression that said everything. Should I tell her Mr. Whitaker is out? Mrs. Gruber said. Is he out? He is at the north fence until 4. Eleanor set down her pen. Then we tell her the truth, she said, and went to the door. Margaret Caldwell on a front porch was a different proposition from Margaret Caldwell on a stagecoach platform. Up close, she was genuinely beautiful. Not young, she was perhaps 34 or 35, but polished in a way that spoke of money spent carefully. She wore a deep blue riding costume, and her hair was perfect under a small hat, and she looked at Eleanor with an expression of gracious pleasantness, so smooth and practiced it was practically impenetrable. Mrs. Whitaker, she said, how lovely to finally meet you properly. I'm Margaret Caldwell. I've been a dear friend of Cole's for some time. Miss Bennet, Eleanor said, we haven't married yet. Come in if you like. I can offer you coffee. Something flickered behind Margaret's gray eyes. The correction had landed. She came in. They sat in the front parlor. Mrs. Gruber brought coffee. Eleanor poured and said nothing particular and waited. Margaret looked around the room with a pleasant, appraising attention that was doing real work. Eleanor could see her cataloging the fresh flowers Eleanor had put on the side table, the account book stacked neatly in the corner, the reorganized bookshelf. You've made some changes, Margaret said. A few small ones. I imagine it's quite an adjustment, coming all this way. A smile. To a place you've never been for a man you've never met. It was, Eleanor agreed. But I find Wyoming suits me. Margaret turned the full warmth of her attention on Eleanor. You know, I think it's admirable. What you've done. Really, I do. Not everyone would have the courage, I suppose, to arrive in a place where everyone knows you came here because no one else would have you. The words were beautiful. Wrapped in silk, every one of them. Everyone. Eleanor picked up her coffee cup. She held it in both hands. She let the silence sit for exactly 3 seconds. "That's a kind thing to say," she said, "if you mean it charitably. Though I notice it assumes that you know more about my circumstances than you do." Margaret blinked. The pleasantness didn't crack, she was too skilled for that, but it shifted slightly. "I only meant—" "I know what you meant," Eleanor said. "And you're not wrong that people have said I'm too old and too plain to be easily married. That's true. It's been said quite a lot." She set down her cup. "But I didn't come to Wyoming because no one else would have me. I came because the man who wrote to me was honest, and I hadn't met very many honest men, and I decided that was worth more than geography." A pause. "Cole Whitaker is a good man," Margaret said, and now there was something real under the pleasantness, something stung and genuine. "I know he is," Eleanor said. "That's why I'm here." The two women looked at each other across the coffee table. Margaret was the first to look away. She left shortly afterward, citing another engagement. Eleanor walked her to the door and saw her off with complete cordiality, because there was no reason to be unkind to a woman who was simply losing something she had expected to have. She went back to the kitchen and picked up her pen and went back to the invoices. Mrs. Gruber, who had apparently been listening from the hallway, appeared in the doorway with an expression that was as close to admiration as her face seemed capable of producing. "You handled that well," she said. "She's not a bad person," Eleanor said. "She just thought things would go differently." Mrs. Gruber looked at her for a moment. Then she sat down at the kitchen table and said, "I'll tell you something about this ranch." And Eleanor set down her pen and listened. What Mrs. Gruber told her took most of an hour. She told her about Cole's mother, who had run this place like a general runs an army, and who had loved her son with the fierce, practical love of a woman who knew life was hard and wanted him ready for it. She told her about the woman Cole had almost married 7 years ago, a woman from Cheyenne named Patricia, beautiful and charming, and utterly uninterested in ranch life, who had left after 4 months and taken a significant portion of Cole's belief in his own judgment with her. She told her about the years since, when Cole had run the ranch with increasing efficiency and increasing isolation, adding acres and cattle, and never once adding anyone he allowed to matter. "He does not trust easily," Mrs. Gruber said. "He is not a man who shows what he feels, but he watches. He has been watching you since you arrived." "I know," Eleanor said. "You don't mind." "I'd rather be watched honestly than flattered falsely." She picked up her pen again. "Give him time. Give me time. I think we'll figure it out." Mrs. Gruber looked at her for another long moment. "Yes," she said in a different tone. "I think you might." It was the Thursday of Eleanor's second week when she found the irregularity in the grazing lease. She had been going through the land records at Cole's request. He wanted to understand his full legal position on the western parcels before the spring roundup, and she had almost passed it by because it was buried in a subclause of a subclause written in the kind of legal language designed to be read past rather than read carefully. She read it carefully. Then she read it again. Then she sat very still for a moment, doing the arithmetic in her head. The grazing lease on the western pasture, nearly 400 acres of prime grassland that Whitaker Ranch had been using for 11 years, contained a reversion clause that nobody seemed to have noticed. If the leaseholder failed to maintain a specific minimum head count on the property during a defined seasonal period, the lease reverted to the original landholder's estate. Cole had not met that head count last fall. He'd been moving cattle away from the western pasture because of the sickness issue. If someone had noticed that failure and the lease terms specified a 30-day window in which the reversion could be claimed, there was a legal argument to be made that the western pasture had already reverted. Eleanor looked at the date. The window had not closed yet. It closed in 11 days. She went to find Cole. She found him in the barn, his coat off and his sleeves rolled up, working alongside 2 hands on a section of damaged equipment. He looked up when she appeared in the doorway, reading something in her expression immediately. "What?" he said. She held out the lease document. There's a problem. He took it, read it. His jaw tightened. She could see the exact moment he found the clause. "How long have I had this lease?" he said. 11 years according to your records. And nobody ever—" He stopped, breathed. "Who holds the reversion rights?" "The estate of a man named Dodd, Arthur Dodd. He died 4 years ago." "Who manages his estate?" "I don't know yet. That's what I'm going to find out." Cole looked at her. The two ranch hands had gone still, pretending not to listen. "If someone already knows about this reversion," he said quietly, "then they've been waiting for the right moment," Eleanor finished. "Yes, that's what concerns me." A long pause. "I'll get my lawyer on the stage first thing tomorrow," Cole said. "I'd suggest tonight if there's a way to reach him," Eleanor said. "We have 11 days. He looked at her for another moment, that look again layered and unreadable, and measuring something she couldn't quite name. "Yeah," he said. "Tonight." He turned to the hands. "Finish this up," he said. "I've got something to deal with." He walked out of the barn beside Eleanor, and as they walked back toward the house through the cooling afternoon, he said quietly without looking at her, "If you hadn't gone through those records—" "You would have found it eventually," Eleanor said. 11 days from now wouldn't have been eventually. It would have been too late. Eleanor said nothing. "Thank you," Cole said. It was such a simple thing. 2 plain words said simply by a man who Eleanor was already learning didn't say things he didn't mean. She felt them settle somewhere deep. "That's what I'm here for," she said, and she meant it as a practical statement. But as she said it, she heard something else in her own voice, something quieter and more private, something she wasn't entirely ready to look at directly yet. "That's what I'm here for. Not just the ledgers, not just the lease clauses, not just the drainage slopes and the supply contracts and the water troughs. Here, in this specific place beside this specific man, on this specific piece of Wyoming land, where the sky was enormous and the work was real, and nobody so far had told her she was too much or not enough. She was here. And whatever was coming from Margaret Caldwell, or reversion clauses or towns that had already decided who she was not leaving." The sun went down over Whitaker Ranch in long gold sheets, and Eleanor Bennett walked back toward the house with her notes under her arm and a feeling in her chest that she hadn't felt in so long she'd almost forgotten its name. She was exactly where she was supposed to be. End of Part 1. Part 2. Lưu ý viết 4.500 đến 5.500 từ liên kết liền mạch với các phần trước trong câu chuyện pha hội thoại, tạo thành một câu chuyện liền mạch khi ghép lại. Mỗi phần liền mạch với phần trước không giới thiệu lại câu chuyện ở đầu phần mới. Liên kết các phần của câu chuyện một cách liền mạch. Sử dụng câu chuyện tiếp giữa các phần. Duy trì chủ đề. Tránh ngắt quãng, đột ngột, không sử dụng gạch đầu dòng hoặc tiêu đề phụ phong cách kể chuyện Mỹ Hoa Kỳ, giống văn giàu cảm xúc chân thực và gần gũi, không mô tả cảnh, tập trung vào hành động, cảm xúc và tâm lý nhân vật. Viết phần 2 đạt điểm 10 trên 10 và bổ sung tiết tấu câu chuyện nhanh, sửa lời ai ai kể theo ngôi thứ 3, tăng độ kịch tính, không viết lân mạn, kết thúc phần không giới thiệu phần sau. Lưu ý trả lời trong mục tin nhắn không nhảy sang mức document mới 2 đến 3 phút. Cần có mini climax và đặt 10 đến 15. Mini climax mỗi phần cứ 10 đến 12 phút. Có một twist lớn sâu sắc, đạn xen mini cliffhanger mạnh hơn. Tăng tính tự nhiên cho phản ứng của các nhân vật, thêm nhịp điệu, kịch tính thực tế và gần gũi. Mỗi 8 đến 10 phút cần có móc giữ chân khán giả. Lưu ý không mô tả cảnh và chỉ cần viết nội dung và viết đúng lệnh cho tôi. Show more. Part 2. Cole's lawyer arrived on the 7 o'clock stage. His name was Gerald Fitch, a compact, serious man in his late 40s who had handled Whitaker Ranch legal matters for 9 years, and who showed up at the front door with his briefcase and his hat in his hand, and the particular expression of a man who had been pulled away from supper and was too professional to say so. Eleanor had the lease document waiting on the desk, along with her handwritten notes breaking down the reversion clause, the relevant dates, and a timeline of Cole's cattle movements in the western pasture over the past 18 months. She'd spent 2 hours on it after supper, while Cole sent the telegram to Fitch's office. Fitch sat down, put on his reading glasses, and went through it. The room was quiet. Cole stood near the window with his arms crossed. Eleanor sat in the chair across the desk, hands folded, watching Fitch read. Fitch set down the document. "How did you find this?" he said. "I was reviewing the land records," Eleanor said. "I nearly missed it. The clause is buried in a paragraph that reads like standard boilerplate, unless you're paying close attention to the numerical terms." Fitch looked at her over his glasses. Then he looked at Cole. Something passed between the two men, a quick, unspoken exchange that Eleanor couldn't entirely read. "It's a valid clause," Fitch said. "If the head count fell below the threshold during the designated period, the reversion rights become actionable." "Did it fall below?" Cole asked. Fitch looked at his notes, at Eleanor's timeline. His jaw tightened slightly. "Based on what's here, yes. In October when you moved the cattle. Then someone can claim the western pasture." "Someone can try," Fitch said. "The question is whether anyone knows about this and whether they've been in a position to document your head count during that period." He pulled off his glasses. "Who has access to your cattle records?" "My foreman," Cole said. "Henderson, and I keep a copy in the office here." "Anyone else?" A pause. Cole looked at Eleanor. Eleanor thought about what Mrs. Gruber had told her, about the estate of Arthur Dodd, about the reversion rights sitting dormant in a dead man's paperwork for 4 years. "I think," Eleanor said carefully, "that someone has already been watching this. I don't think the reversion clause was an accident. I think it was put there to be useful at exactly the right moment." Fitch looked at her. "That's a serious accusation." "It's not an accusation," Eleanor said. "It's a hypothesis, one that fits the evidence." She leaned forward. "Who manages the Dodd estate?" Fitch went still. It was a small stillness, barely a pause, but Eleanor caught it. "You know," she said. Fitch set his glasses down on the desk very carefully. "The Dodd estate was taken into receivership 2 years ago," he said. "It's managed by a trust company out of Cheyenne. The principal trustee is a man named Warren Aldous." The name meant nothing to Eleanor. It meant something to Cole. She saw it happen, a subtle tightening across his face, something clamping down behind his eyes. "Aldous?" he said. It came out flat and quiet, the way people say things they've been afraid of saying. "You know him," Eleanor said. "I know of him." Cole's voice was careful now, each word set down deliberately, the way you'd set something fragile on an unsteady surface. "He's been buying up land in this territory for the past 3 years. Small parcels mostly. Distressed properties. He has a way of showing up right when people are vulnerable. And now he has reversion rights to 400 acres of your best grazing land," Eleanor said. "If he knows about the head count failure." "Assume he does," Eleanor said. "What does he do next?" Fitch and Cole looked at each other again. "He files," Fitch said. "He files a claim with the Territorial Land Commission, and he argues the reversion. We contest. It becomes a legal fight." "How long does that take?" "Months, possibly longer." "And in the meantime?" "In the meantime," Fitch said, "the western pasture is in dispute. You can't operate it normally. Spring roundup gets complicated. Your head count numbers for the season are affected." "Which affects your revenue," Eleanor said, looking at Cole. "Which affects the operating margin I was just beginning to stabilize." The room was very quiet. Cole uncrossed his arms and walked to the desk. He looked at Eleanor's timeline, her careful handwriting, the neat columns of numbers. "He's been waiting for this," Cole said. It wasn't a question. "I think so," Eleanor said. "How do we stop him?" Eleanor had been thinking about this for the last 3 hours. She pulled a second sheet of notes from beneath the timeline. "The reversion clause has a cure provision," she said. "I almost missed it. It's 2 sentences at the bottom of the next page, and the language is designed to be overlooked. But it's there. If the leaseholder can demonstrate that the head count failure was caused by documented circumstances beyond his control, disease mitigation, for example, and can restore compliance within the cure period, The reversion right becomes void. Fitch grabbed the document again, flipping pages. Eleanor waited. She watched his eyes move across the page, slow down, stop. "She's right," Fitch said quietly. "There is a cure provision." "How long is the cure period?" Cole asked. 30 days from the date the reversion right becomes actionable, Fitch said. He looked at Eleanor. "When do you calculate the right became actionable?" "October 17th, Eleanor said, "based on the headcount records." "That means the cure period." "Closed in November," Cole said flatly. "Yes?" Eleanor said. "Technically." She held his gaze. "But the cure provision requires that the original leaseholder be notified in writing when a reversion right becomes actionable. That notice has to be sent within 10 days of the event, or the clock on the cure period doesn't start." Fitch was ahead of her now. His glasses were back on, and he was moving through the document with the focused energy of a man who had just seen something important. "If no formal notice was sent," he started, "then the cure period never legally commenced," Eleanor finished. Silence. Then Fitch looked up from the document and said in a completely different tone, "Where did you learn to read a contract?" 4 years working for men who thought I was just keeping their accounts," Eleanor said. "I read everything on the desk. It seemed useful." Cole was looking at her with an expression she hadn't seen on him before. It wasn't surprise exactly. She had the feeling he'd run out of being surprised by her somewhere around day 4. It was something quieter, more internal, like a man revising something he'd believed about the world for a long time. "Can we verify that no notice was sent?" he said, pulling his attention back to Fitch. "I can check the territorial records," Fitch said. "If Aldous filed notice, it would have to appear in the county record. If it doesn't appear there, then the cure period is still open," Eleanor said. "Then the cure period is still open," Fitch confirmed. He stood up, gathering his papers with brisk efficiency. "I'll be in Cheyenne on the first stage tomorrow morning." "Do it quietly," Cole said. "If Aldous knows we found the cure provision, he'll move faster," Fitch agreed. "I understand." He paused at the door, looking back at Eleanor. "Miss Bennett." "Yes. That was excellent work." He said it simply, without flattery, the way professionals recognize each other. Eleanor nodded once. "Thank you." Fitch left. The house went quiet. Eleanor could hear the night sounds coming through the window, the distant movement of cattle, the wind in the grass, a horse shifting in the barn. Cole sat down in the chair across from her. He had the look of a man who had just absorbed a blow and was taking a moment to assess what was broken. "He's been planning this," Cole said. "Almost certainly." "For how long?" "Long enough to wait for the right conditions." Eleanor paused. "The cattle sickness in the western pasture, I don't think that was coincidence either." Cole looked at her sharply. "The water contamination," she said. "The timing. You started moving cattle away from the western pasture because of the sickness. That's what pushed your head count below the threshold. If someone introduced the contamination deliberately, that's a hell of an accusation." "I know." She held his gaze steady. "I'm not making it officially. I'm telling you what the pattern looks like." Cole was quiet for a long moment. His hands were flat on the desk, and she could see the tension in them, the controlled, careful stillness of a man keeping a very tight rein on something that wanted to move fast and hard. "If you're right," he said. "If I'm right, then we need proof before we say it to anyone else. Suspicion without evidence only makes you look paranoid." She stood up, gathering her own papers. "Let's wait for Fitch. See what the county records show. Then we decide what we know and what we only think we know." Cole looked up at her. "You're very calm," he said. "I'm not calm," Eleanor said honestly. "I'm just better at working while I'm not calm than I used to be." She tucked the notes under her arm. "Get some sleep if you can. Tomorrow's going to be a long day." She was almost at the door when he said her name. "Eleanor." She stopped. "Why do you care this much?" he said. "About this ranch, about this fight. You've been here 2 weeks." She turned and looked at him. really looked at him, the tired line of his shoulders and the guarded, genuine question in his eyes. "Because it's mine now, too," she said. "Or it will be, and I don't give up on what's mine." She left him with that, and this time when she heard him exhale slowly in the empty office behind her, she let herself feel the full weight of what she'd just said. She meant it, every word. Fitch's telegram arrived on Saturday morning. Eleanor was in the kitchen with Mrs. Gruber when Henderson brought it in from the gate, a folded paper with the Cheyenne stamp on it already 24 hours old. She read it first because Cole was out at the north fence and Henderson couldn't reach him fast enough. 3 sentences. No formal notice recorded in county record. Cure period still actionable. Aldous knows. He filed yesterday morning. Eleanor stood in the kitchen, holding the telegram with Mrs. Gruber, watching her from across the flour barrel. "Bad news?" Mrs. Gruber said. "The kind you plan for," Eleanor said. She handed the telegram to Henderson. "Find Cole, right now. Tell him Fitch needs him to respond by end of business today." Henderson was already moving. Eleanor went to the office. She sat down at the desk and pulled out the lease document and Fitch's most recent letter and her own notes, and she began drafting the response, not because it was her place to draft it, but because when Cole arrived 20 minutes later, still dusty from the fence line, she wanted him to have something to work with and not a blank page. He read her draft in silence, standing at the desk still in his coat. Then he sat down and picked up the pen. "Change the 3rd paragraph," he said. "That part about the contamination, I don't want to claim it was deliberate until we have evidence." Agreed. Eleanor leaned over and crossed out the relevant lines, rewrote them in the margin. "There. That's softer. We're claiming unforeseen livestock health emergency rather than deliberate interference. Same legal effect, less provable opposition from Aldous." Cole read the revised version, nodded once, signed it. "Get this to Fitch by the afternoon stage," he said to Henderson, who had appeared in the doorway. Henderson took the papers and was gone. Cole leaned back in the chair. He looked at Eleanor with an expression she'd come to recognize, the one he wore when he was working out something that had no clean resolution. "He knows we know," Cole said. "What does he do now?" "He applies pressure from another direction," Eleanor said. "That's what people like Aldous do. The legal route is one attack, but they rarely rely on only one." Meaning I'd watch your supply contracts, your staff, your social relationships in town." She met his eyes. "And I'd be careful about what Margaret Caldwell knows." The name landed between them. Cole's expression shifted not defensively, but with the careful attention of a man who was recalibrating again. "Margaret and Aldous don't know each other," he said. "Are you certain?" A pause. "No," he said. "I'm not." "Then keep that in mind." He looked at her for a long moment. "You don't trust her." "I don't trust the timing," Eleanor said. "She came here unannounced the same week I found the lease clause. Maybe that's coincidence." She shrugged slightly. "I like to know which things are coincidence before I assume they are." Cole said nothing. He was thinking she could see it, the gears behind his eyes, the slow, careful process of a man who had built his whole life on being certain before he moved. "I've known Margaret Caldwell for 6 years, he said finally. "I know," Eleanor said. "I'm not asking you to stop knowing her. I'm asking you to be careful about what she knows." Another silence. "That's a very specific kind of careful," Cole said. "Yes," Eleanor agreed. "It is." He didn't argue. That told her more than agreement would have. The attack from another direction came sooner than Eleanor expected. It came on Monday, and it didn't come from Aldous or from Margaret. It came from Eleanor's own past. A man named Gerald Horn arrived in Willow Creek on the Monday stage. Eleanor didn't know he was there until she walked into Whitaker's general store with Mrs. Gruber and saw him standing at the counter, broad-shouldered, well-dressed, the kind of man who looked like success, and spent considerable effort making sure of it. He turned around when she came in. His expression did something complicated. "Eleanor," he said. She felt the air go out of the room. Not from fear, she'd run out of fear where Gerald Horne was concerned a long time ago. From the specific weariness of encountering a thing you thought you'd left behind and finding it had followed you anyway. "Gerald," she said. Mrs. Gruber beside her went very still, in the way of a woman who understood immediately that this was important. Gerald Horne smiled. It was the same smile Eleanor remembered, beautiful, practice designed to be the last word in any room. "I heard you'd come out west," he said. "I had business in Cheyenne. Thought I'd come see how you were getting on." "I'm getting on very well," Eleanor said. "Thank you for asking." "Married a rancher." He made it sound like an anecdote fondly told, slightly unbelievable. "I have to say, Eleanor, when they told me who you'd taken up with—" "I'd be careful how you finish that sentence," Eleanor said. He stopped, reassessed. Gerald Horne was not a stupid man. He had always been very good at understanding exactly how far he could push. "I just mean it's unexpected," he said with a slightly different smile. "You always said you'd never leave St. Louis. People change their minds." She picked up the items she'd come for from the counter display thread, a new ledger, 2 boxes of tacks, and set them down for tallying. "Are you passing through, Gerald, or staying?" "A few days, I think." His eyes moved over her with the particular assessment of a man who had once decided she wasn't worth keeping and was now reconsidering his math. "Maybe longer, depending on how things go." Eleanor paid for her items, picked up her parcel. "Enjoy Willow Creek," she said. "It's a lovely town." She walked out. On the boardwalk, Mrs. Gruber matched her pace and said nothing for half a block. Then, "Who was that man?" "Someone I used to know in St. Louis," Eleanor said. "He was looking at you." "He has a habit of looking at things he's already decided he doesn't want, and then changing his mind when someone else shows interest." Mrs. Gruber considered this. "He came a long way just to look at you." "Yes," Eleanor said. "He did." She thought about that for the rest of the walk back to the ranch. Gerald Horne didn't travel on sentiment. He traveled on interest, financial interest, social interest, the interest of a man who kept very careful track of what he believed was owed to him. "Why are you here, Gerald?" she thought. "And who told you where to find me?" By the time she reached the ranch house, she had an answer she didn't like. "Bad," she told Cole that evening. She told him plainly who Gerald Horne was, what they had been to each other in St. Louis, what she knew about his habits and his motivations, and the way he moved toward things he wanted. Cole listened. He sat across the kitchen table with his coffee going cold and his face very still, and he listened to all of it without interrupting. When she finished, he said, "He worked for a land investment company in St. Louis." "Yes." "What company?" Eleanor looked at him. "I don't know. I never asked. I didn't know him in a professional capacity." A pause. "What capacity?" She held his gaze. "He was someone I thought I might marry 3 years ago. He chose differently." Cole's jaw moved slightly. "He chose wrong," he said. It came out flat and certain without decoration. He said it the way he would say that a fence post was set wrong or a supply contract was unfavorable, as simple fact, not consolation. Eleanor felt something catch in her throat. She pushed it down. "The question is what he's doing here now, whether it's connected to Aldous." "It's connected," Cole said. He stood up. "I want to know what land company he works for. I'm going to wire Fitch tonight." "Cole." He stopped. "If it is connected," Eleanor said carefully, "then Aldous sent him, or found him, knowing our—" She paused on the word, knowing our history, thinking he could use it. Cole looked at her. Something moved behind his eyes, something protective and quietly furious that he was holding with both hands. "Use it how?" he said. "To create a story," Eleanor said. "That I came here for reasons other than a clean start. That I was sent. That I'm not who I say I am." She kept her voice steady. "A woman's character is easy to question. It's a common enough tactic." The quiet in the room had weight to it. "Is there anything," Cole said slowly, deliberately, "that Horn could truthfully say about you that would make me change my assessment of you?" Eleanor thought about it honestly. "I don't believe so." "Then he's got nothing that matters," Cole said. "Whatever story he tries to tell." "Stories don't have to be true to do damage," Eleanor said. "They just have to be told." Cole picked up his coffee cup, looked at it, set it back down. "I've been dealing with other people's stories about me since I was 23 years old," he said. "I'm still here. My ranch is still here." He looked at her directly. "You're still here." The simplicity of it, the plain, unadorned certainty, did something to Eleanor's chest that she had no immediate defense against. "Yes," she said, "I am." Fitch's reply to the wire about Gerald Horn's St. Louis employer came back in 48 hours. Eleanor was in the office with Cole when Henderson brought it in. Cole read it. His expression didn't change exactly, but something behind it went cold and very focused. He handed it to Eleanor. She read Gerald Horn, associate at Meridian Land Investment, St. Louis. Meridian Land is a subsidiary of Aldous Holdings, registered Cheyenne. Have confirmed connection. Advise caution on all fronts. Eleanor set the telegram down. "There it is," she said. "He didn't come here for you," Cole said. "He came here to be seen with you." "To create the impression of a connection," Eleanor agreed. "Something Aldous could use to suggest my motives for being here are not what they appear." "He's building a case for the Land Commission," Cole said. "Not just the legal reversion argument. He wants to suggest the whole situation is compromised, that I was manipulated into missing that head count by a woman who was placed here to distract you." The ugliness of it sat between them. Cole's voice, when he spoke, was very quiet. "He found the one person who could walk into your past and make it look like a transaction." "It's clever," Eleanor said. She was surprised by how steady her own voice was. "I'll give him that." "It's not going to work. Not if we act first." She leaned forward. "We need to file the cure compliance before Aldous can introduce the character argument. Get the livestock documentation to Fitch immediately. Everything that shows the cattle movement was a health response, not negligence. If we establish the factual record first, his narrative doesn't have solid ground to stand on. Can you pull all of that together? By tomorrow morning?" Cole looked at her. "Eleanor." A pause, long enough that she looked up from the papers. "I'm sorry he came here. I'm sorry he thought your past was something to be used." The words were simple, completely unperformed. Said the way Cole said everything that mattered quietly, directly, without any extra weight put on them to make them seem more important than they already were. Eleanor felt them the whole way down. "I'm not sorry," she said, surprising herself slightly with the truth of it. "If he hadn't come, we wouldn't have known about the Meridian connection. Now we do. That's useful." Cole studied her face for a moment. "You turned it into something useful," he said. "It's what I do," Eleanor said simply. She went back to the papers, but her hands under the desk where Cole couldn't see them were not entirely steady. Chad. She worked through the night, not because Cole asked her to. He had in fact told her twice to get some rest, and both times she had thanked him and kept working. By 2 in the morning, the kitchen was quiet except for the lamp and the occasional settle of the house, and Eleanor had assembled a complete documentation package. Cattle movement records, the veterinary report from Doc Paris correspondence about the water contamination, the corrected ledger entries showing the western pasture costs, everything organized and cross-referenced and ready for Fitch to take to the Territorial Land Commission. She was reviewing the last section when she heard footsteps in the hallway. Cole appeared in the kitchen doorway. His hair was unkempt, and he had the look of a man who had tried to sleep and given up. He looked at the spread of papers on the table, at Eleanor, at the lamp turned low at the coffee gone cold beside her. "You haven't slept," he said. "I will when this is finished." She didn't look up from the page. "Why are you awake?" A pause. Couldn't. He came into the kitchen and, without asking, picked up her coffee cup and went to refill it. Eleanor watched him, the matter-of-fact ease of it, the complete absence of any performance. He set the refilled cup back in front of her and pulled out the chair across the table and sat down. "What else needs to be done?" he said. "Sit there and look through the livestock register for September and October," Eleanor said. "Mark any entry where the Western pasture head count is recorded. I need to cross-reference it with the lease threshold numbers." Cole picked up the register without comment and opened it and began reading. They worked across the table from each other in the lamplight and the quiet. Neither of them talked much. The clock on the wall marked the hours. At some point, Mrs. Gruber's bread left to prove overnight filled the kitchen with a faint, yeasty warmth. At 3:15, Cole said, "Here, October 9th. Henderson wrote in the count himself 204 head in the Western pasture." Eleanor checked her notes. "The threshold is 250, so the failure began October 9th. "That's when Doc Paris told me to start moving them," Cole said. "I remember because it was the same day we lost 3 head to the sickness." "Do you have that in writing? His recommendation?" "He would have it in his records." "We need a letter from him confirming it, signed and dated." Eleanor made a note. "Can you reach him first thing?" "I'll go myself," Cole said. She looked up at him across the table. He was leaning forward with both forearms on the table, the register open in front of him, and the lamp caught the tiredness in his face, and something else underneath it. A focused, settled determination that she had come to recognize as the particular way Cole Whitaker committed to things. He didn't commit easily. She had already learned that. But when he did, it was complete, without reservation. "Cole," she said. "Yeah. When this is over, the legal fight, all of it, I want to dig up the rest of the Dodd estate records. I want to know if there are other clauses in other agreements that Aldous could use. I want to go through every piece of paper on this ranch." Cole looked at her steadily. "That's going to take months." "I know." "You're planning months ahead," he said. "I told you," Eleanor said. "I don't give up on what's mine." The word mine sat in the air between them. Cole was very still. Then slowly something in his face, the held, guarded quality that she had watched him carry since the stagecoach platform, shifted. Not dramatically, not like a wall coming down, more like a door that had been stuck for years, opening just enough to let the air through. "No," he said quietly. "I'm beginning to see that you don't." Eleanor looked at him for one long moment. His eyes gray-green and tired, and something else she didn't have a clean word for, looking back at her across the lamplight and the paperwork and the hard practical evidence of everything she had done in the 3 weeks since she had stepped off a stagecoach with one suitcase and refused to apologize for any of it. She looked down at her papers. "October 9th, she said. "Doc Paris's letter, first thing." "First thing," Cole agreed. They worked until the lamp began to dim, and outside the kitchen window, the Wyoming sky went from black to the deep bruised purple that comes just before dawn, and Eleanor Bennett sat at the table of Whitaker Ranch with ink on her fingers and a case she was going to win, and felt quietly, privately, completely, that she had never in her life been more exactly herself than she was right now. The morning brought Doc Paris's letter written in a firm hand and dated to confirm his October 9th recommendation to relocate the Western pasture herd for health containment purposes. It also brought Gerald Horn to the ranch gate. Eleanor saw him from the office window. He came up the road on a hired horse alone and stopped at the gate where Johnson was posted. And there was a brief conversation, and then Johnson turned toward the house. Eleanor was at the front door before Johnson got there. "Man at the gate asking for Miss Bennett," Johnson said. He had the careful neutrality of a man who understood the situation and wasn't touching it. "Thank you, Johnson," Eleanor said. "Tell him Miss Bennett is not available." Johnson nodded and turned back. Eleanor watched from the window. She watched Gerald receive the message, watched the calculation move across his face. She knew that face knew every expression that crossed. It had spent a year learning it, and another year learning to stop caring what it meant. She watched him say something to Johnson, watched Johnson shake his head. Gerald Horn looked at the house for a long moment. Then he turned his horse and rode back the way he'd come. Cole appeared at her shoulder. He had seen it too. "He'll try again," Eleanor said. "Let him." Cole's voice was level. "He's got nothing here." "He'll go to town instead," Eleanor said. "He'll talk to people. He's very good at talking to people." "So am I," Cole said, "when I need to be." She looked at him. "I haven't been," he said. "Good at talking to people in town. I've let them form their own opinions for too long and not bothered correcting them." He paused. "I think that needs to change." Eleanor turned this over. "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting we go to town," Cole said. "Together. And let people see who you actually are, not who Horn is about to tell them you are." Eleanor looked at him steadily. "You want to take me to town and stand next to me in public." "I want to take my future wife to town," Cole said, "and stand next to her in public." Yes. The phrase "my future wife," so plain and direct, without any of the tentative language she'd been bracing for, landed somewhere she wasn't prepared for. "All right," she said when she trusted her voice again. "Tomorrow," Cole said. "Tomorrow," Eleanor agreed. She turned back to the window. The gate road was empty. Gerald Horn was gone, but she knew with a certainty that had nothing romantic in it and everything practical that the real fight was just beginning, and that it would be fought not only in the Territorial Land Commission's records office, but on the streets of Willow Creek, in the eyes of a town that had already decided what Eleanor Bennett was, and hadn't yet discovered how badly they were wrong. She had been waiting her whole life to show them. They went to town the next morning. Eleanor wore her second-best dress, the gray wool with the white collar clean and pressed, and entirely unspectacular, because she had decided a long time ago that dressing to impress people who had already dismissed you was a form of surrender. She pinned her hair up neatly and put on her good boots, and got into the wagon beside Cole without ceremony. Cole wore what he always wore, clean shirt, good coat hat that had seen some weather. He didn't dress up for Willow Creek, and Eleanor respected that about him more than she could easily explain. They rode the 2 hours in the kind of silence that had become comfortable between them, not empty, not avoidant, but working. Eleanor was running through the documentation package in her head. Cole was watching the road with the expression of a man preparing for something he'd been putting off. "Have you been to town much?" Eleanor asked. "Since your mother died." "For business?" Cole said. "Not for anything social." People noticed. "I know they did." "They interpreted it as grief turning into arrogance," Eleanor said. "In my experience, that's what people usually decide when someone stops showing up." Cole glanced at her. "Is that what they say?" "It's what Margaret Caldwell implied when she came to the house, carefully." Eleanor looked ahead at the road. "She's been positioning herself as the person who understands you, the one who's been patient while you've kept yourself apart." A pause. "She has been patient." "I know," Eleanor said. "I'm not questioning her feelings, Cole. I'm telling you how the story reads from outside. Right now, to the people of Willow Creek, you chose a stranger over a known quantity, someone they could vouch for." She turned to look at him directly. "They need to see why." Cole was quiet for a long moment. "I'm not good at performing for people." "I'm not asking you to perform," Eleanor said. "I'm asking you to show up. There's a difference." He thought about that. "Yeah," he said finally. "There is." They rode the rest of the way in silence, but something had settled between them, a shared understanding of what this morning was actually about, and why it mattered, and what they were walking into. Willow Creek on a Thursday morning was as busy as it ever got. Eleanor felt the shift in attention the moment the wagon rolled down the main street. It wasn't dramatic, no one stopped walking or pointed. But the glances came quick and assessing the way small-town eyes always moved when something worth noting arrived. She felt them track from Cole to her and back again, recalibrating against whatever Gerald Horn had been saying for the past 2 days, because she had no doubt he had been saying something. Cole tied the wagon in front of the general store, and came around to help her down. He did it naturally without performance, his hand steady under her elbow, and Eleanor took note of the fact that several women near the dry goods display saw it. "Fitch's office first," Cole said. "Yes. Then the feed merchant. I want to talk to the Denver supplier's local agent if there is one." She kept her voice practical and even. "And I'd like to stop at the schoolhouse." Cole looked at her. The schoolhouse. "I've been thinking about the children in the worker families on the ranch," Eleanor said. "How far they travel for school. I want to understand what the situation is." He studied her face. "That's not about Aldous." "No," Eleanor agreed. "It's not." He said nothing, but something around his eyes changed slightly, that infinitesimal softening she'd learned to read. They crossed the street together, and Eleanor kept her chin up and her stride even, and she noticed every face that turned toward them and made a mental note of what each one carried. Curiosity, judgment, wariness, and in a few, just a few, but they were there something more open. Something that wanted to be told a different story than the one it had already heard. Those were the faces she was here for. They were coming out of Fitch's office. 40 minutes later, Fitch had handed over the formal filing confirmation, the Land Commission had received their cure compliance documentation, and Aldis's claim was now officially contested when Eleanor nearly walked into Margaret Caldwell on the boardwalk. It was not accidental. Eleanor could see that immediately. Margaret had positioned herself with the particular precision of a woman who had timed her approach to the second. She looked beautiful. She always looked beautiful. And today, there was something different in her expression. Not the gracious pleasantness of her visit to the ranch, but something more open and more painful, as though she had decided to stop performing and try something more dangerous. "Cole," she said. "Margaret." His voice was not unkind, just measured. Margaret looked at Eleanor. "Miss Bennett, I heard you've been helping Cole with the ranch business." "Eleanor has been invaluable," Cole said. He said it plainly before Eleanor could respond. And the plainness of it, no qualification, no hedge, made Margaret's composure flicker. "I'm glad to hear it," Margaret said, and Eleanor could hear the genuine effort it cost her to mean it. "Cole." She turned back to him. "I need to tell you something, about Gerald Horn." Cole went very still. "He came to see me yesterday," Margaret said. "He told me things about Miss Bennett, about why she came here." She paused, and Eleanor watched the conflict move across her face, a real conflict not performed. "He said she was placed here by business associates of Aldous to create a distraction, to give Aldous time to build his case." A moment of complete silence on the boardwalk. Then Cole said, "And what did you say to that?" Margaret looked at him. "I told him I didn't believe it." Eleanor hadn't expected that. Cole hadn't either. She could feel it in the slight shift of his posture beside her. "He said he had proof," Margaret continued. "Letters, documentation." She looked at Eleanor directly for the first time since the conversation started. "I told him that anyone could manufacture letters, and that I had watched Eleanor Bennett in my parlor handle herself with more integrity than most men I know, and that if he wanted to spread stories about her in this town, he could expect me to say that." She stopped. Her jaw was set. "I don't like you very much," she told Eleanor, with the startling directness of a woman who had decided honesty was the only thing she had left. "I won't pretend otherwise, but I dislike dishonest men considerably more." Eleanor looked at her for a long moment. "Thank you," she said, simply, without false warmth. Margaret nodded. One crisp, uncomfortable nod. Then she looked at Cole with everything she felt written plainly on her face, all of it the loss and the acceptance, and the long years of hoping for something different. And she said, "She's good for you. I can see that she is." She walked away before either of them could respond. Cole and Eleanor stood on the boardwalk in the bright morning air. "I did not expect that," Eleanor said quietly. "No," Cole agreed. "She's a better person than I gave her credit for." "Most people are," Cole said. When you let them be. Eleanor absorbed that, filed it. The letters Horn mentioned, we need to know if they're real or manufactured. If he had real documentation connecting you to Aldous, he would have gone to the Land Commission already, not to Margaret. Cole's voice was certain. He was testing how much ground he had. Margaret just told him he has none. Not in this town, Eleanor said. He'll go somewhere else with it. Let him. Cole looked at her. Ready to go to the feed merchant. Yes, Eleanor said. They walked on. The town watched them go, and Eleanor felt the quality of the watching change. Something had shifted on that boardwalk, in the 3 minutes of a conversation she hadn't planned for, and the change moved through the street the way changes always did in small towns, fast and invisible from eye to eye. It was at the feed merchant that Eleanor found the second thing she hadn't been looking for. She had been asking the merchant, a heavy-set man named Carlyle, about his supplier relationships specifically, whether he had any contact with the Denver operation she'd been researching as an alternative to Cole's Cheyenne contract, when Carlyle said something that made her stop mid-sentence. Denver's reliable enough, he said, though they've had some pressure lately from the Aldous buying consortium. Fellow came through here 2 months ago talking to all the merchants. Said Aldous Holdings was looking to consolidate supplier relationships in the territory. Anyone who wanted continued business in an Aldous-managed territory had better think about their allegiances. Eleanor set down the ledger page she was holding. 2 months ago, she said. What fellow? Carlyle scratched his chin. Didn't give a name, well-dressed, had a St. Louis accent. Eleanor looked at Cole. Cole said, Describe him. Carlyle described Gerald Horn. The silence that followed was the specific silence of two people understanding the full shape of something at the same moment. He was here before Eleanor arrived, Cole said. He came ahead, Eleanor said. He laid the groundwork. Talk to the merchants suggested Aldous's control of the territory was inevitable. Built the atmosphere of inevitability before the legal fight even started. She felt the cold clarity of it settle into place. And then he came back with me as the second act. The distraction, the proof that Cole was already compromised. He was building a story, Cole said. The whole time. He's very good at stories, Eleanor said. I should have anticipated this. You couldn't have known. I knew what he was, Eleanor said. I should have known what he would do. She heard the edge in her own voice. Not at Cole, not at Gerald, not even entirely at herself. At the situation, at the sheer specific ugliness of someone reaching back into her history and weaponizing it with this much precision. Cole touched her arm. Just briefly, just his hand closing once on her elbow before releasing. It was the first time he had touched her without the practical purpose of helping her in or out of a vehicle. Eleanor felt it go straight through her. What do we do with this? Cole said. His voice was steady and focused. Working voice. She breathed, found her own steadiness. We take Carlyle's statement, she said. Written and signed. We send it to Fitch. We add it to the filing. She looked at Carlyle. Would you be willing to put that in writing, what you just told us? Carlyle looked between them. He was a practical man, not a political one, and Eleanor could see him assessing the wind direction. Aldous has been pushing hard, Carlyle said slowly, making people nervous about going against him. I understand, Eleanor said, and I won't pretend there's no risk in what I'm asking. A pause. But I will tell you, she continued, that Warren Aldous doesn't own this territory yet, and he won't if the Land Commission gets complete information about how he operates. She held Carlyle's gaze. Your statement wouldn't be alone. It would be part of a record that includes legal documentation, veterinary evidence, and financial records that show a pattern of deliberate manipulation. She paused. He's done this before, hasn't he? To other ranches, other merchants. Carlyle's expression confirmed it before his words did. Dodd wasn't the only one, he said quietly. There were 2 others, smaller operations. They didn't fight. We're fighting, Eleanor said. Carlyle looked at her for a long moment. Then he reached under the counter for paper and a pen. John. They came out of the feed merchant with a signed statement, and Eleanor's heart going somewhat faster than she was letting anyone see. Cole walked beside her without speaking for half a block. Then, 2 other operations. Yes. Aldous has done this before. Systematically. Yes. Eleanor kept walking. Which changes what this is. From a land dispute to a pattern of deliberate fraud across the territory, Eleanor said. That's not a local land commission matter anymore. That's a federal matter. Cole stopped walking. Eleanor stopped too. He was looking at her with that distance-reading gaze, but it was focused very close now. Focused on her. If we push that argument, he said, we're not just fighting for the western pasture, we're going after Aldous directly. Yes. He'll fight back harder. Yes. He has more resources than we do, more connections. He's been operating in this territory for years. Yes, Eleanor said. All of that is true. And you think we should do it anyway? She looked at him steadily. I think that if we only fight for the western pasture, we win this battle, and Aldous moves on to the next ranch, the next merchant, the next family who didn't know to read the subclauses. She paused. But that's your decision, Cole. This is your land, your risk. I can tell you what I see and what I think should be done, but I won't make that choice for you. Cole held her gaze for a long moment. A woman walking past them on the boardwalk glanced at them with undisguised curiosity and kept moving. What do you need? Cole said. Eleanor felt something release in her chest. Fitch first. We need to understand whether a federal argument is viable before we commit to it. And I want to talk to the families from the 2 other operations Carlyle mentioned. If they lost their land to Aldous, their stories are evidence. That could take weeks. Then we start today, Eleanor said. Cole looked at her for one more moment. Then he turned back the way they'd come. Fitch's office, he said. Again. Eleanor fell into step beside him. They were still in Fitch's office at 2 in the afternoon when the door opened and Henderson came in looking like he'd ridden hard. He had. Problem at the ranch, he said to Cole, and his voice had the particular controlled urgency of a man delivering bad news to his employer. Water's down in the north trough, cattle are bunching, and somebody cut the fence line on the east border. The room went cold. Deliberately cut, Cole said. Looks it, clean cut, not a break, and there's tracks near the post-shod horse, not one of ours. Cole was already on his feet. He looked at Fitch. Get everything filed today. Everything we have, don't wait. I'll have it to the commission by 4, Fitch said. He was already moving toward his filing cabinet. Cole looked at Eleanor. Go, she said. I'll stay with Fitch and make sure the filing is complete. He hesitated for just a second, and she saw in that second something she didn't have time to examine. A flicker of something personal that had nothing to do with the legal situation. Then he nodded. Henderson will take you home when you're done, he said. Don't go anywhere alone. I won't, she said. He left. She heard his boots on the boardwalk and then the sound of horses moving fast. Eleanor turned to Fitch's desk and sat down. Show me what still needs to be done, she said. Fitch sat down across from her and opened the file. The federal argument is going to require precedent documentation. I have 2 cases, one from Colorado territory, one from Nebraska, where similar consolidation patterns were successfully argued as fraud before a federal examiner. Pull them, Eleanor said. Both of them. I want to understand the evidentiary standard. Fitch pulled them. They worked. The afternoon light moved across the office window. Eleanor read case documents and made notes and asked questions, and Fitch answered them with the crisp precision of a man who had been quietly impressed for some time and was no longer trying to hide it. At one point he said without preamble, How long did you work in law? I didn't, Eleanor said. I worked for men who did. I read everything on the desk. You have a gift for it. I have a habit of paying attention, Eleanor said. Most people think it's the same thing. Fitch smiled, brief, dry, genuine. At 3:30, while Eleanor was cross-referencing the Nebraska precedent against their own documentation, the office door opened. Gerald Horn walked in. He was alone. He looked at Eleanor with an expression she recognized, the one he wore when he had made a calculation and was confident in the result. Behind it, something else. Something she hadn't seen on his face in St. Louis, because in St. Louis she hadn't been a problem to him. Fear would be too strong a word. Concern was more accurate. The concern of a man whose plan was not going the way it was supposed to. "Eleanor," he said. "Gerald?" She kept her eyes on the document in front of her. "Mr. Fitch is busy. If you have legal business, you can make an appointment." "I need to talk to you." "I'm also busy." "Eleanor." His voice dropped, and under the calculation she heard something she didn't expect. Something genuine, strained, almost urgent. "This has gotten larger than you understand. Aldous isn't, he doesn't stop. People who push against him don't come out well." Eleanor set down her pen. She looked at him. "Are you warning me?" she said. Gerald's jaw moved. "I'm telling you that whatever you think you're building here, it isn't worth what he'll bring down on it. On you? On Whitaker." He stepped closer. "You don't know what he's capable of." "Tell me," Eleanor said. A pause. "I can't," Gerald said, and the two words cost him something visible. Eleanor looked at him for a long moment. The man she had thought she might marry, standing in a Wyoming lawyer's office, with fear underneath his practiced surface, warning her away from a fight he didn't have the courage to join. She felt something for him. It wasn't contempt. It wasn't even pity. It was something more like grief for the person she had believed he was a long time ago. "Gerald," she said quietly. "What did he do to you?" The question landed harder than she intended. She saw it hit, saw his face shift in a way it almost never shifted in public, and for a second he looked less like a polished associate of Aldous Holdings, and more like a man who had made a choice he couldn't walk back. "Go home," he said. "Both of you. Let the western pasture go. There are other acres." "Not for the families he already took from," Eleanor said. Gerald looked at her. He looked at her like a man saying goodbye to something. Then he turned and walked out of the office without another word. The door closed. Fitch had not moved during the entire exchange. Now he looked at Eleanor with an expression she hadn't seen on him before. "He knows something specific," Fitch said. "Yes," Eleanor said. She picked up her pen. "Note that conversation. Date time what he said. Add it to the file." She looked back at the Nebraska precedent. "What he told us is not exculpatory for Aldous. It's confirmation." Fitch picked up his own pen. "Confirmed," he said quietly. Eleanor kept working. But her mind was moving on two levels now, one on the documents in front of her, and one on what Gerald Horn had looked like when he said he doesn't stop. The way the words came from somewhere deeper than professional calculation, from somewhere that had been living with the knowledge for long enough that it had changed his face. "What did Aldous do to you?" she thought. "And how do I find it before he does it to us?" Henderson took her back to the ranch at 5. Cole was at the east fence when she arrived, still working with two hands to assess the damage. She walked out to him directly. He looked up when he heard her coming, and she read the situation in his face before he said a word. Controlled anger, controlled worry, the tight-held expression of a man managing multiple bad things at once. "How bad?" she said. "Fence is fixable. Cattle are settled. Nobody's hurt." He paused. "But we lost 4 head through the break. They crossed onto the Henderson parcel before we got the gap closed." "Henderson's neighbor." "Different Henderson, not my foreman." He looked at her. "The parcel is owned by Aldous Holdings, purchased 18 months ago." Eleanor went very still. "So our cattle are now on Aldous land," she said. 4 of them. "And he can claim they were trespassing." "He can do more than that," Cole said. Depending on how he wants to play it, he can claim we were attempting to assert grazing rights on his property, which would complicate the Western pasture argument considerably. Eleanor thought about it. Fast, practical, moving through the implications. He staged it, she said. The fence cut. He drove them through. I think so. Can we prove it? Cole's jaw tightened. The tracks near the cut post. If we can match them to a specific horse or rider, get Doc Paris to look at the tracks. He knows horses. And have Johnson take measurements before anyone else comes through. She was already thinking ahead. We need to recover the cattle today, before dark. I can't go on all this land without permission. Then get it, Eleanor said. Send a letter to his Cheyenne office tonight requesting formal permission to retrieve strayed livestock. Be polite. Be precise. Put it in writing. She met his eyes. If he refuses, the refusal is evidence. If he agrees, we get the cattle back and the incident is closed. Either way, we control the record. Cole looked at her with an expression she had no clean name for, yet not admiration exactly, and not surprise exactly, but somewhere in the territory between the two, where neither word was quite sufficient. You're always 3 steps ahead, he said. I'm 2 steps behind Aldous, Eleanor said. I'm just trying to catch up. Something moved in Cole's face. You haven't slept properly in 4 days. I'll sleep when the filing is complete. Fitch filed at 4. Henderson confirmed it on the road. Eleanor absorbed that. The filing was done. The cure compliance was on record. The federal fraud argument was submitted alongside it. Whatever Aldous tried to do from this point forward would be happening against an established legal record. She felt the tension in her shoulders drop by a fraction. Good, she said. Come inside, Cole said. Mrs. Gruber has kept supper. He said it simply, no ceremony in it. But he stood there in the cooling evening air, and waited while she turned from the fence line and moved toward the house. And then he walked beside her. Not behind, not ahead, beside. It was such a small thing. Such a specific, particular small thing. Eleanor noted it. Nut. Supper was quiet. Mrs. Gruber had made something substantial and served it without commentary, which was her version of care, and then found a reason to be elsewhere, which was her version of discretion. Cole and Eleanor ate. The silence was tired now, not working the silence of 2 people who had been running at full speed for days and were momentarily letting themselves stop. Cole set down his fork and said, Gerald Horn. He warned me off, Eleanor said. At Fitch's office this afternoon. Henderson told me he was seen in town. He said Aldous doesn't stop, that people who push against him don't come out well. She paused. He was genuinely afraid. Cole said, Aldous has something on him. That's what I think too. If he does, then Horn is a potential witness, not just an obstacle, Eleanor said. If we can understand what Aldous holds over him, and if Horn decides the risk of staying silent is greater than the risk of speaking. She let the sentence hang. That's a lot of ifs. Yes. She picked up her coffee. But people who are afraid sometimes get to the point where they're more afraid of living with what they know than they are of saying it out loud. She looked at Cole. I've been at that point. I know what it looks like. Cole was quiet for a moment. When the question surprised her. Not because it was inappropriate, it wasn't. They were past the point of inappropriate questions, but because of the directness of it, the genuine wanting to know quality of it. In St. Louis, she said, when I understood what Gerald was, what he'd been doing while I believed I knew him. She set down the cup. I knew things about his business practices that were not legal. I stayed quiet for almost a year. Because speaking would have cost me everything. What changed? I did, Eleanor said. I got tired of carrying it. I reported what I knew to the relevant authorities, and I packed one bag, and I came to Wyoming. She met his eyes. It's part of why he's afraid of me. Not because of what I still know. Because of what I proved I was willing to do. The lamplight between them was steady and warm. Cole said very quietly, and he thought coming here would scare you into silence again. He thought I hadn't changed, Eleanor said. People who knew you before tend to assume you're still whoever you were when they left you. She shook her head. He miscalculated. Cole looked at her for a long moment. What did it cost you? He said. Reporting him. Before you left. Eleanor thought about it honestly. My reputation in certain circles. 2 friendships that turned out to be contingent on my silence. A lease on my rooms that wasn't renewed. She paused. Less than I expected, actually. The things I thought I'd lose, most of them weren't real. And you came here, Cole said. And I came here, Eleanor confirmed. The house was very quiet around them. The clock on the wall, the distant sounds of the ranch at night, cattle and wind, and the occasional shift of a horse in the barn. Eleanor, Cole said. She looked at him. He was looking at her with an expression she had been watching form for 3 weeks, building slowly, layer by layer behind the weather-worn, guarded exterior of a man who had forgotten how to let things matter. I'm glad you came, he said. I need you to know that. A pause. Not because of the ledgers, not because of the lease clause or the filing or any of it, because of... He stopped, and she could see him searching for the words with the frustrated care of someone who didn't use them often and wanted to get it right. Because you're the first person in a long time that I actually want to know what they think. It was the most he had said at once about anything that wasn't ranch business. Eleanor held his gaze across the supper table in the lamplight. That's the most valuable thing anyone has ever said to me, she said honestly. That they wanted to know what I think. They sat with that for a moment. Then Cole picked up his fork again, and Eleanor picked up her coffee, and the evening settled back into its quiet, and neither of them said anything else about it. They didn't need to. But when Eleanor went to her room that night, and sat at the window with her notes and the last of the daylight dying in the western sky, she sat there for a long time, without opening a single document. Just sitting. Just breathing. Just letting herself feel fully, and without defense, the exact shape of where she was and who she was becoming, and what was growing in the space between 2 people who had both been alone for too long. Outside, the Wyoming night stretched enormous and dark and full of stars, and Whitaker Ranch settled around her like something that had always been waiting for her to arrive. She had not been looking for this. She had not known this was what a place feeling like home could feel like. And somewhere in the house, she heard Cole's boots in the hallway, the measured familiar sound of them, and then silence as he went to bed. She opened her notes, but she was smiling. The letter from Warren Aldous arrived the next morning. Not through Fitch, not through the Land Commission. Directly to the ranch, addressed to Cole Whitaker, hand-delivered by a rider who was back on the road before anyone thought to ask him questions. Cole brought it to Eleanor before he opened it. She didn't comment on that. She just stood beside him at the office desk while he broke the seal and read it. She read it over his shoulder. It was 3 paragraphs long, written in the smooth, reasonable language of a man who was absolutely certain of his position. The first paragraph acknowledged the cure compliance filing with something that was technically conciliation and actually contempt. The second paragraph outlined Aldis's intention to pursue the reversion claim, regardless, on the grounds that the cure compliance documentation contained discrepancies that his legal team would be presenting to the Land Commission for review. The third paragraph was the one that stopped Eleanor's breath for a full 3 seconds. It has come to my attention that the primary researcher and author of the documentation submitted in support of Mr. Whitaker's cure compliance claim has a documented history of filing false commercial reports with St. Louis mercantile authorities. I am prepared to provide the Land Commission with these records, which will call into question the integrity of all documentation produced under Miss Bennett's direction. I trust Mr. Whitaker will consider the implications of relying on compromised sources in a legal proceeding of this nature. Cole read it twice. Then he set it down on the desk. Is he telling the truth? He said. His voice was very even. About St. Louis? No, Eleanor said. He's inverting the truth. The report I filed with St. Louis mercantile authorities was a fraud report against Gerald Horne's company. The false commercial records he's referring to are the records Horne's company filed afterward, claiming my report was fabricated." She paused. "It's what powerful men do when someone reports them. They report back." Cole was very still. "So, he has documentation that taken out of context makes you look like the person who committed fraud?" "Yes." "And he's going to present it to the Land Commission?" "He's going to try." Cole turned from the desk and walked to the window. His back was to her, and she could see the tension in it, the held, controlled anger of a man who had spent his whole life building something and was watching someone try to take it apart. "Cole," she said. He turned. "I should have told you about the St. Louis report before now," she said. "I knew it was possible Aldous had found it. I told myself the timing wasn't right, but the truth is, I was afraid of how it would look before you had enough time to know me." She held his gaze. "I'm sorry for that." A long pause. "You told me about Gerald Horne," Cole said. "You told me about what you reported. I told you the broad shape of it, not the specific risk. The specific risk being that someone could twist it to use against us." "Yes." Cole looked at her. The expression on his face was something she hadn't seen on him before. Not anger, not disappointment, but something deeper and harder, and more honest than either of those. "Here's what I need to know," he said. "Right now. One question. Did you do anything dishonest in St. Louis?" "No." "Is there any document, any record, any piece of paper that shows you acting with anything less than integrity?" "No." "Then Aldous has nothing real," Cole said. "He has a story. And I've been dealing with stories about me since before you arrived." He picked up the letter. "Get Fitch on the stage today. We need to prepare a counterfiling that establishes the St. Louis record in full context before Aldous presents his version." Eleanor looked at him. "You believe me," she said. "Not a question. An acknowledgement." "I told you I know what I know," Cole said. "I know you." He held her gaze. 3 weeks is enough time to know someone. When they're being real. Eleanor breathed. "Yes," she said. "It is." She reached for the letter. She read the third paragraph again, cold and carefully, this time her mind already moving through what was needed, what Fitch would require, how the St. Louis record could be presented in a way that turned Aldous's attack into additional evidence of his pattern. The shape of it was becoming clear to her now, the full shape. Not just a land dispute, not just a reversion clause and a poisoned water supply and a cut fence line. A man who had been doing this for years, building control over this territory. Property by property, using legal tools and manufactured scandals and carefully placed operatives to dismantle the defenses of people who didn't know what was coming until it was already there. He had done it to the Dodd estate. He had done it to 2 other ranches. He had sent Gerald Horne ahead 2 months early to prepare the ground. And he had made one mistake. He had not known when he chose Whitaker Ranch as his next target, that Cole Whitaker was about to send for a woman who had spent 31 years learning to read everything on the desk. Eleanor set down the letter. "I need 2 hours and the full St. Louis file," she said. "And I need Fitch here by noon." "I'll send for him now," Cole said. He was already moving toward the door when Eleanor said, "Cole." He stopped. "We're going to win this," she said. Not as comfort, as assessment. He looked at her for one moment. That look, the one that had been building for 3 weeks. The one she still didn't have a clean name for, but recognized now as something she wanted to keep seeing for a very long time. "Yeah," he said. "We are." He left to send for Fitch. Eleanor opened the St. Louis file and went to work. Fitch arrived at 11:45, 30 minutes ahead of Cole's request, which told Eleanor that Henderson had impressed the urgency correctly. He came through the office door with his briefcase already open, his hat barely off his head, and the expression of a man who had been thinking hard on the road from town and had arrived with something to say. "Before we discuss the counter-filing," Fitch said, sitting down and pulling papers before Eleanor could speak. I need to tell you what I found this morning. Cole leaned against the desk. Eleanor sat across from Fitch with the St. Louis file in her hands. Neither of them said anything. Fitch had the manner of a man delivering something significant, and they let him set his own pace. I've been making inquiries about Aldis Holdings for the past 48 hours, Fitch said. Quietly, through colleagues in Cheyenne and Denver. He set a folded telegraph paper on the desk. Warren Aldis is under preliminary federal investigation. Land fraud. 3 states including Colorado and Nebraska. The cases I pulled for the precedent argument, one of them is him. The Colorado case. It didn't go anywhere at the time because the complainant withdrew. But the federal examiner's office kept the file open. Eleanor looked at Cole. Cole looked at the telegraph paper without touching it. How preliminary, he said. Preliminary enough that no one's been charged, Fitch said. But substantial enough that a territorial land commission hearing that produces additional pattern evidence, a Wyoming case with documentation signed, witnesses a clear record of deliberate manipulation, could push the federal examination from preliminary to active. The room was very quiet. We're not just contesting a reversion clause, Eleanor said. It came out slow because she was thinking as she spoke. We're potentially the evidence that makes a federal case. You could be, Fitch said. If the hearing goes the way I think it can go, and if the St. Louis documentation holds up in context. He looked at Eleanor directly. That's why Aldis moved when he did. He knows about the federal file. He's trying to close this dispute quickly before it can be added to that record. His letter yesterday, Cole said, the attack on Eleanor's credibility. He's not trying to win the Land Commission hearing, Eleanor said, and the full shape of it landed clean and cold as creek water. He's trying to discredit me specifically. Discredit me, and the documentation I built loses its evidentiary value. The hearing goes in his favor, the Western pasture reverts, and whatever the federal examiner has on him doesn't get the Wyoming case added to it. She paused. We're not just collateral damage in his land strategy. We're a threat to his entire operation. Fitch nodded. That's my read. Cole pushed off the desk. He walked 3 steps and stopped and turned back. It was the first time Eleanor had seen him pace the contained, controlled energy of a man whose instinct was to move and who had disciplined himself out of it for too many years. If we push hard at the hearing, he said, present the full pattern. Carlisle's statement, the other ranchers, the St. Louis context, the water contamination timeline, all of it. And the federal examination becomes active. He goes after more than the ranch, Eleanor said. Cole looked at her. He'll understand that I'm the one who built the record, she said. Gerald warned me. He said Aldis doesn't stop. He was talking about something specific. The silence in the room took on weight. I'm not pulling back, Eleanor said, before Cole could respond to that. I want that clear. I'm not saying it to suggest we retreat. I'm saying it so we can plan around it. Eleanor. Cole. She held his gaze. I reported Gerald Horn in St. Louis, knowing there would be a cost. The cost was manageable because I was alone, and I only had myself to protect. She paused. The situation is different now. I want to make a clear decision, not walk into one by accident. So I need to ask you directly, understanding what this could bring. Do you want to push for the full federal argument? Cole looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, I have 32 hands who depend on this ranch. Families. 2 of them are going to have babies before summer. I've got 4 workers' kids who travel an hour each way to school because there's no closer option. He stopped. If Aldis gets the western pasture, he starts here and he doesn't stop. You said so yourself. He'll take the next ranch and the next one, and the families there won't know what's coming. He looked at Eleanor straight on. Yes, I want to push for the full argument. Eleanor nodded once. Then let's build the strongest possible case, she said, and turned to Fitch. The St. Louis file. Walk me through what we need to establish context. Why? They worked through the afternoon without stopping. Eleanor laid out the St. Louis documentation piece by piece, the original fraud report she had filed, the retaliatory counter-filing from Horn's company, the mercantile authorities' eventual finding that her report was substantiated, and Fitch organized it into a narrative sequence that built context before Aldous could present his distorted version. Cole sat in the corner of the office and read. He didn't interrupt. He didn't ask questions she was already answering. He read everything Eleanor put in front of him with the focused attention of a man who understood that knowledge was the only adequate preparation for what was coming. At 3 p.m, Mrs. Gruber came to the doorway and said there was a boy at the gate with a message. Cole went to the gate and came back 2 minutes later with a sealed note. He read it standing in the office doorway. His expression changed. "Gerald Horn," he said. "He's asked to meet. Tonight. Not in town out here." Eleanor looked up from the document she was reviewing. "What time?" 7 o'clock. He says he has something to give us." Cole looked at her. "He says he's done." The word "done" sat in the room. Fitch said, "It could be a trap. Aldous using him to—" "It could be," Eleanor said. She thought about Gerald's face in the law office. The genuine fear underneath the practiced surface. The way the words "he doesn't stop" came from somewhere that had been carrying them for a long time. "But I don't think so." Cole looked at her. "You trust him." "I don't trust him," Eleanor said carefully. "But I believe he's afraid, and I believe he's reached the point I mentioned before where the weight of staying silent is heavier than the cost of speaking." She met Cole's eyes. "I want to hear what he has to say." "I'll be here," Cole said. "Not a question." "I know," Eleanor said. Fitch stayed for the meeting. He sat in the corner of the front room with a notebook and said little and watched everything, which was Eleanor had come to understand how Fitch operated at his best. Gerald Horn arrived at 6:55. He came alone on a hired horse with a leather satchel over his shoulder. He had the look of a man who had made a decision and was moving before he could change his mind. There was a quickness to him, almost jittery, that Eleanor had never seen on his polished exterior before. She opened the door before he could knock. He looked at her, at Cole behind her, at Fitch in the corner. Something in his jaw loosened slightly, as though the presence of a lawyer made the whole thing more real, and real was what he needed it to be. "Come in," Eleanor said. He came in. He stood in the middle of the room and didn't take the offered chair. His hand was on the satchel. "I'm going to give you this," he said. "And then I'm going to tell you what it is. And then you're going to ask me questions, and I'm going to answer them. And after that I want your lawyer to take a deposition." He looked at Fitch. "Written. Witnessed. On the record." "Agreed," Fitch said from the corner. Gerald set the satchel on the table. He looked at Eleanor. "You were right about the water contamination. I wasn't part of it. I need you to know that. I didn't know about that until afterward. But I know who did it, and I know how, and it's in there." Eleanor said nothing. She waited. "Aldous has a system," Gerald said. "He's been running it for 9 years. He identifies land with valuable long-term assets. Water rights, mineral potential, rail corridor positioning. And he constructs conditions that force the legal transfer at below market value. The reversion clauses are one method. He has people who insert them into lease agreements during routine renewal processes. The original landholders rarely notice." "Who are his people?" Cole said. "Lawyers. 3 of them operating across 3 territories, 1 in Wyoming." Gerald's jaw tightened. "He also has people who introduce the conditions, the water issues, the livestock sickness, the fence problems. Men who know how to make things look like bad luck." He looked at Cole. "Your water contamination was deliberate. Introduced through a hired man named Cassius Reed, who was employed as a temporary hand on your South Range 18 months ago. He's on Aldous' payroll." Cole went very still. "Cassius Reed," he said. "I remember him. Left after 2 months. Said he had family business." "He did his job and left," Gerald said. "That's how they work." "Is that in the satchel?" Eleanor said. "Yes." Signed statements, copies of payments from Aldous Holdings accounts correspondence. Gerald's voice was flat now, deliberate. The voice of a man reading something off a wall. I've been collecting it for 14 months. The room was very quiet. Eleanor looked at him. Why? Gerald looked back at her. Because he did to me what he did to the Dodd estate 7 years ago. Before I was working for him, when I had my own operation. Small one. He took it. Manufactured a legal scenario I didn't have the resources to fight. He paused. And then he offered me a job. And you took it, Cole said. I took it, Gerald said, because I had nothing left and I needed to eat. His voice didn't ask for sympathy. It was just fact delivered with the exhaustion of someone who had been living with the fact for a long time. I told myself I'd find a way out. I collected everything I could. Every document that showed what he was doing. Every payment, every instruction, every result. He looked at Eleanor. And then I heard he was going after Whitaker Ranch, and I heard who Cole had sent for, and I thought. He stopped. You thought I'd be easier to use than to warn, Eleanor said. At first. Yes, Gerald said. At first. He held her gaze. And then I saw you in Fitch's office, and I understood that you hadn't changed at all. And I realized that trying to use you was the same mistake I'd been making for 7 years. He looked down at the satchel. I'm done making it. A long pause. Cole said, You understand what this means for you. I'm a witness against one of the most powerful land operators in the territory, Gerald said. Yes, I understand. He'll go after your credibility. He's welcome to try, Gerald said. The documentation isn't my credibility, it's his own records. Fitch was already on his feet, notebook open, moving to the table. Mr. Horn, he said. With your permission, I'd like to begin the deposition immediately. Gerald finally sat down. He looked at Eleanor one more time with an expression she had no simple name for regret and relief, and something that was trying to be dignity. I'm sorry, he said, for what I was when you knew me, and for what I tried to do when I came here. Eleanor looked at him steadily. Make the deposition count, she said. That's the apology I need. He nodded. Fitch sat down across from him and opened his pen. Eleanor stepped out of the room and left them to it. Cole followed her into the kitchen. She stood at the window with her arms crossed, not looking at anything particular, just breathing in the way of someone who needed a minute to let a large thing settle. Cole poured 2 cups of coffee and set one near her without saying anything. She picked it up. 9 years, she said. He's been doing this for 9 years. And Gerald's been sitting on evidence for 14 months. He was afraid. She turned from the window. I'm not saying he was right, but I understand it. The decision to speak up against someone with that kind of power when they've already shown you what they can do. She shook her head. It's not a small thing. You did it, Cole said. In St. Louis. I had less to lose than he did, Eleanor said. I'd already lost most of it. She held the coffee cup in both hands. Besides, I had a stubborn streak that made the decision easier than it should have been. It's not stubbornness, Cole said. She looked at him. It's character, he said. There's a difference. The kitchen was warm and quiet around them. From the front room, the low, steady sound of Fitch asking questions, and Gerald answering the particular cadence of a deposition, deliberate and relentless. When this is over, Eleanor said, and the hearing is done and Aldous is dealt with. She paused. I want to start on that school. Cole looked at her. The one for the workers' children, she said. I've been thinking about the location. There's a piece of flat ground between the main house and the south bunkhouses. Good light, close enough for even the youngest children to walk safely. Cole set down his cup. He was looking at her with that expression, the one that had been building for weeks, the one she kept catching and then looking away from, because it was too much to look at directly, when she was trying to think clearly about lease clauses and evidentiary standards and federal case precedents. Eleanor, he said. She made herself meet his eyes. "I want to ask you something," he said. "And I need you to answer me honestly, not practically." She waited. "When you think about this place," Cole said, "Whitaker Ranch. This land, the people on it, do you think of it as yours? Not because of any legal arrangement or any obligation, but actually yours. The way a person feels about something that belongs to them." The question went somewhere quiet and deep. Eleanor thought about Mrs. Gruber's bread, and Johnson's careful tracking of the fence lines, and the way Henderson's youngest daughter had started shyly leaving wildflowers on the kitchen steps. She thought about the account books, and the lease clauses, and the poisoned trough she had identified on her 4th day. She thought about the way the kitchen light came in the morning, and the sound of Cole's boots in the hallway at night, and the stars over Wyoming that were different from any other stars she'd seen, because they were hers. "Yes," she said. "It's mine." Cole nodded slowly. The way he nodded when something confirmed what he already believed, and the confirmation mattered more than the believing. "Then I want to make it legal," he said. "Properly, not the arrangement we came here with." He paused, and she could see the effort it cost him, not because the feeling wasn't there, but because putting feeling into words was still new territory for him, still ground he was learning to walk on. "I want to marry you, Eleanor, because I want to, not because it's practical, and because I think we're something." He stopped. "I'm not good at this part." "You're doing fine," Eleanor said very quietly. "I'm not a man who says things he doesn't mean," Cole said. "I know you know that. So when I say I want this, the legal part and the real part, both of them, I mean it." Eleanor looked at him. For a moment, just a moment, she let herself feel everything she had been managing carefully for a month. The specific accumulated weight of waking up every morning in a place that felt like it was waiting for her to arrive. The steadiness of a man who said simple things and meant all of them. The quiet revolution of being seen not as too old or too plain or too independent, but as exactly specifically right. "Yes," she said. Cole looked at her. "Yes. Yes, Cole. I'll marry you." She picked up her coffee cup. "Properly." Something happened to his face. Slow, complete, the kind of change that came from the inside, the careful held expression he'd worn since the stagecoach platform opening, not all at once, but enough. Enough that she could see what was underneath it. "Good," he said. It was such a Cole Whitaker thing to say that Eleanor almost laughed. She held it to a smile. "Good," she agreed. From the front room, Fitch's voice continued steady and deliberate, building a record that was going to matter. The Territorial Land Commission hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks out. In those 3 weeks, Eleanor did not stop working. She organized the full evidence package with a precision that Fitch, on the 3rd review, said was the most comprehensive land fraud documentation he had seen in 20 years of territorial law. Gerald Horn's deposition ran to 47 pages. Carlisle's statement was corroborated by 2 other Willow Creek merchants who came forward once word got around that someone was actually fighting Aldous. The families from the 2 other operations, the ones Carlisle had mentioned, the ones who had lost their land and not fought, came to Whitaker Ranch one evening and sat at the kitchen table with Eleanor and told her everything they remembered, and she wrote all of it down in her careful, compact hand. The water contamination evidence was confirmed by Doc Paris, who had taken samples from the South Trough 18 months earlier and kept them out of professional habit, he said, because something about the sickness pattern had bothered him and he never threw anything away. The samples showed a specific mineral compound not naturally occurring in that soil composition. Cole found Cassius Reed 3 weeks before the hearing. Not for the confrontation. Cole was too disciplined for the confrontation that would have felt satisfying and been legally useless. He found him through careful, patient investigation, confirmed his continued employment through Aldis's network of subsidiary companies, and added the information to the evidence file. The town of Willow Creek changed in those 3 weeks. Slowly, the way towns changed, not all at once, not with any announcement. But Eleanor noticed it. The women who had watched her with open judgment on the stagecoach platform began greeting her when she came to town. Mrs. Carlyle invited her to a sewing circle, which Eleanor declined politely on the grounds of being buried in legal preparation, but appreciated. 2 ranch wives from properties near Whitaker's sent notes asking if they could speak with her about their own lease agreements. She answered every note. Cole watched all of it with the expression of a man who had spent years avoiding the town's attention and was now watching it realign around someone who walked into it every week without fear. One morning, about 10 days before the hearing, he said, "Margaret Caldwell came to see me yesterday." Eleanor looked up from her paperwork. "You weren't here," Cole said. "She came to the ranch while you were in town with Fitch." Eleanor set down her pen. "What did she say?" "She said she'd heard from 2 of the other merchants about what you've been doing, the evidence collection, the families." He paused. "She said she wants to help." Eleanor was quiet for a moment. "How?" "She has letters," Cole said, "from Aldous. He approached her about a year ago. She didn't understand at the time what he was actually proposing. She thought it was a legitimate investment opportunity. She turned it down, but she kept the letters because she didn't like the feeling they left." He looked at Eleanor steadily. "She said she didn't realize until recently what they were actually about." Eleanor thought about Margaret Caldwell on the boardwalk, saying she disliked dishonest men considerably more than she disliked Eleanor. Meaning it. "Her letters would show his approach methodology," Eleanor said slowly. "Another instance of the same pattern." "Yes. She understands it could draw his attention to her." "I told her that," Cole said. "She said, and I'm quoting here, 'I've been a widow in a territory run by men like Aldous for 6 years. I am not afraid of his attention.'" Eleanor absorbed that. "Add her letters to the file." "I already told her Fitch would be in touch." She looked at him. Something in her expression must have shown because Cole said, "What? You did that without asking me first," she said. A beat. "Should I have asked?" "No," Eleanor said. "You made the right call." She paused. "I'm just noticing that you made it." Cole looked at her for a moment with an expression she was getting better at reading. "Partnership," he said. "You said it in the beginning. That's what this is." "Yes," Eleanor said. "It is." She picked up her pen, but the words stayed with her all morning, warm and solid and real. The night before the hearing, Eleanor couldn't sleep. Not from fear. She was past fear about the hearing. The case was as strong as it was going to be, and she had done everything she could, and she knew the difference between anxiety and preparation. She was awake because her mind wouldn't stop running the sequence. Aldous's team would open with the reversion argument. They would introduce the alleged discrepancies in her documentation. They would present the distorted St. Louis record. They were going to try to make her the center of the case, make it about her credibility rather than his conduct. She knew it. She had planned for it. She was ready for it. What kept her awake was not the planning. It was the awareness, sudden and clear in the quiet of 2 a.m, that she had never in her life had as much to lose as she had right now. In St. Louis, she had reported Gerald Horn from a position of comparative freedom. She was alone. She had her rooms and her job and her small, carefully maintained life, and she had walked away from all of it without looking back because nothing about it was irreplaceable. Now she had a kitchen where Mrs. Gruber made bread with the morning light coming in. She had 32 families whose livelihood ran through the land she had spent a month learning to understand like her own body. She had a man who said simple things and meant all of them, who had asked her to marry him in a kitchen over cold coffee, because he wanted to, not because it was practical. She had so much to lose. She heard the sound she had learned to listen for, without knowing she was listening for it. Cole's boots in the hallway. Not the settled going-to-bed sound of earlier. The awake, moving through the house sound of a man who had also given up on sleep. A knock at her door. Light brief. "Eleanor, you awake?" "Yes." "Kitchen?" he said. "I'll make coffee." She put on her robe and went to the kitchen and sat at the table while Cole made coffee in the lamplight, with the economical movements of a man who had made coffee alone in the middle of the night, enough times to do it without thinking. He set the cup in front of her and sat down across the table. "What are you thinking about?" he said. "Everything we could have done differently," Eleanor said. "That's usually what keeps me awake. Afterward, I'll think about what we did right. Right now, I'm running the other list." "That's useful. Sometimes it finds the gaps." She wrapped both hands around the cup. "What are you thinking about?" Cole was quiet for a moment. "I'm thinking about the fact that 9 years of Aldous operating in this territory means 9 years of people who didn't have enough information to fight back," he said. "And I'm thinking that whatever happens tomorrow, that ends, because the record exists now. Even if the hearing doesn't go the way we want, the record exists. Other people can use it." Eleanor looked at him. "That's a generous way to think about it the night before," she said. "It's the true way," Cole said. "The ranch matters, the western pasture matters, but if we go in there tomorrow thinking only about those things, we've missed what this actually is." Eleanor held his gaze across the table. "When did you start thinking like that?" she said. Cole looked at his coffee cup. "About 3 weeks ago," he said. "When someone sat at this table and explained to me the difference between winning a dispute and making something better." Eleanor felt the warmth of that go all the way through her. "We're going to win the hearing," she said. "I know. Aldous is going to fight it. I know that too. And then—" She stopped. "And then," Cole said, looking at her over the rim of his cup, "we build the school." Eleanor felt something happen in her chest that she had no adequate word for. Something that was partly about the school and partly about the way he had said "we" without thinking about it, as though the word had stopped being an effort and started being the natural shape of how he thought. "Yes," she said. "Then we build the school." They sat with their coffee in the lamplight while the Wyoming night moved around the house, and neither of them said anything else because there was nothing else necessary to say. The hearing convened at 9 in the morning. The Territorial Land Commission chamber in Willow Creek was not large, but it was full. Eleanor had not expected that she had expected the principals and their lawyers, and perhaps a few interested observers. Instead, she found nearly 60 people crowded into the room. Ranch hands, merchants, women from the sewing circles, the 2 families who had lost land to Aldous and come to tell their stories. Margaret Caldwell in the 3rd row, perfectly composed, and in the back corner, Gerald Horn. Not avoiding Eleanor's eyes when she found him, but meeting them steadily and holding them until she nodded once, and he nodded back. Aldous' team was 3 lawyers from Cheyenne and 1 from Denver. They set their papers with the unhurried confidence of men who rarely lost. Fitch sat alone on the other side of the commission table. His briefcase was closed. He had told Eleanor the night before that a closed briefcase was always more intimidating than an open one. Cole sat beside Eleanor in the front row. He had dressed carefully this morning, not expensively, but deliberately. Clean lines. Worn well. The appearance of a man who took this seriously without needing to prove it with theater. He had not said much this morning. He had handed her coffee without being asked, and driven the wagon to town with the same quiet certainty with which he did everything that mattered. The commission chair opened the hearing. Aldous' lead lawyer spoke first. He was smooth and well organized, and he laid out the reversion argument with the practiced precision of a man who had made this argument before. The lease clause, the head count failure, the non-compliance, the claim. And then, as Eleanor had anticipated, he turned to her. "We wish to raise a matter of evidentiary integrity," he said in the tone of a man performing reluctance. The documentation submitted in support of Mr. Whitaker's cure compliance claim was assembled primarily by Miss Eleanor Bennett, currently residing at Whitaker Ranch. It has come to our attention that Miss Bennett has a documented history of filing contested commercial reports with the St. Louis mercantile authorities. "Mr. Chairman." Fitch's voice was calm and measured, cutting cleanly across the sentence. "If the opposing counsel intends to introduce the St. Louis commercial record, I would ask that the Commission review the complete record, not the excerpted version submitted by Aldous Holdings' legal team." The Commission chair looked at the Aldous lawyer. "Is there an objection?" The Aldous lawyer paused. The pause was very brief, but Eleanor caught it. They had not expected Fitch to already have the complete record. They had expected to control what version the commission saw. "No objection," the lawyer said. Fitch opened his briefcase. He set a bound document on the commission table. The complete St. Louis mercantile record, including the original fraud report filed by Miss Bennett, the retaliatory counterfiling by Meridian Land Investment, a company we will demonstrate is a subsidiary of Aldous Holdings, and the mercantile authorities finding that Miss Bennett's original report was substantiated and the counterfiling was dismissed. The room shifted. Eleanor felt Cole beside her go very still, not with surprise, but with the held intensity of a man watching something he'd been working toward arrive exactly as planned. The commission chair picked up the bound document and began reviewing it. The Aldous lawyer was speaking quietly and rapidly to his colleague. Fitch sat down. He glanced at Eleanor. The briefest nod. She had built that document, every page of it. 3 weeks of late nights and coffee gone cold and lamplight in the office, with Cole reading beside her. She kept her face neutral and her hands still. The hearing continued. Each piece of evidence came in clean. Carlyle's statement, the merchant corroboration, Doc Paris's water sample analysis, the cattle movement records, the veterinary recommendation, the cut fence photographs, the tracking measurements Johnson had made, the statements from the 2 displaced families, Margaret Caldwell's letters from Aldous, which arrived in the record with the particular impact of documentation from someone the opposing side had assumed was their social ally, and Gerald Horne's deposition, all 47 pages of it. When Fitch submitted the deposition, the room went very quiet. Not the polite quiet of people listening. The specific quiet of 60 people understanding simultaneously that what they were hearing was larger than a single land dispute. The Aldous lawyer tried to challenge Gerald's credibility. He was thorough and aggressive and professionally competent, and none of it touched the documentation, because the documentation wasn't Gerald's credibility. It was Aldous's own records, with his own signatures in his own hand. Gerald himself had been subpoenaed to testify in person. He sat in the witness chair with the stillness of a man who had made his choice and was living in it now, and he answered every question directly without elaboration, without defensiveness. At one point, the Aldous lawyer asked him, "Mr. Horne, isn't it true that you personally traveled to Willow Creek at Mr. Aldous's direction to discredit Miss Bennett?" "Yes," Gerald said. "And instead, you chose to assist her case?" "Yes." "Why?" Gerald was quiet for a moment. He looked at Eleanor, not performing the look, just placing it where it belonged. "Because she was right," he said, "and I was tired of being on the wrong side of that." The room held the answer in silence for a beat. Then it moved on. The commission chair called a recess at 2 in the afternoon. Eleanor and Cole sat in the hallway outside the chamber. People moved around them, talking in low voices, clusters of conversation breaking and reforming. Margaret Caldwell walked past, caught Eleanor's eye, and gave a single composed nod that carried everything it needed to carry, and nothing excess. Cole had his hands on his knees and was looking at the floor with the focused stillness of a man who had done everything he could and was now in the particular purgatory of waiting. "We have the better argument," Eleanor said quietly. "I know." "And the better evidence." "I know that too." He looked at her. "I'm not worried about the evidence." A pause. "I'm thinking about the families who lost their land, the Dodd estate, the others. Whatever happens in there today, those cases are over." "The federal examination isn't over," Eleanor said. "Fitch said the evidence we submitted goes directly to the federal examiner's office. What happens in that room today doesn't determine what happens to Aldous in the longer run." Cole looked at her. "You believe that—" "Yes," Eleanor said. "I believe that the record we built matters, regardless of today." She paused. "But I also believe we're going to win today." Cole held her gaze for a moment. "Yeah," he said. "So do I." The commission chair called them back in at 2:40. The decision came 20 minutes after that. The chair set down his papers and looked over the room with the expression of a man who understood that what he was about to say would matter for longer than this afternoon. In the matter of the reversion claim filed by Aldous Holdings against Whitaker Ranch, he said, "This commission finds that the cure compliance documentation submitted by Mr. Whitaker's counsel meets the standard set by the lease agreement's cure provision. The reversion claim is denied. Whitaker Ranch retains full legal title and lease rights to the western pasture." He paused. "Furthermore," he said, and the room went very quiet again, "this commission finds sufficient evidence of a pattern of deliberate legal manipulation to warrant formal referral of this case to the Office of the Federal Land Examiner. That referral will be submitted today." The room erupted, not loudly, not with the roar of a celebration, more like the release of 60 people exhaling at once a sound that was partly relief and partly something more complicated, the sound of a community understanding that something that had been coming for years had finally been stopped. Eleanor did not move. She sat with her hands folded in her lap and let the sound happen around her, and she thought about a boarding house room in St. Louis, and a letter that was 4 sentences long and 1 small suitcase, and a stagecoach platform where a woman in a wine-colored dress had spoken loud enough to be heard. She thought about drainage slopes and account ledgers and 47-page depositions and bread rising in a kitchen with good morning light. Cole turned to look at her. He didn't say anything. He didn't make a speech or reach for her hand or do any of the things that the moment perhaps invited. He just looked at her, directly and completely the way he looked at things that mattered, with that distance-reading gaze finally focused close. She looked back. Everything that needed to be said was already in the room. She smiled, and Cole Whitaker, the man who had built his whole life on holding things carefully, on keeping the door cracked just enough to breathe and not enough to let anything in, smiled back. Full, unheld, real. It was the most she had seen of him since the stagecoach platform, and it was more than enough. The ride back to Whitaker Ranch from the hearing was the quietest 2 hours Eleanor had spent since arriving in Wyoming. Not uncomfortable quiet. Not the working quiet of 2 people processing problems. Something different. The deep-settled quiet of people who had been running at full speed for weeks and had suddenly unexpectedly been allowed to stop. Cole drove. Eleanor sat beside him. The late afternoon light came in long and gold across the territory, the kind of light that made everything it touched look like it had always been exactly where it was supposed to be. About halfway home, Cole said, "Fitch said the federal referral could take months before anything happens." "Yes," Eleanor said. "Aldous will know about the referral by tomorrow." "Yes." "He won't stop operating while the federal examination is underway." "No," Eleanor said. "He won't, but he'll be careful. Men like Aldous are always most dangerous when they're cornered, but they're also most careful. He'll pull back from anything that creates additional record while the examiner is watching." She paused. "And the other ranches in the territory now have access to what we filed. Fitch made sure of that. They know what to look for in their own agreements." Cole nodded slowly. "You thought about that before the hearing. Making the record public was always part of the plan," Eleanor said. "Winning our hearing mattered, but the point was never just us." Cole looked at her sidelong. The expression on his face was the one she'd seen for the first time in that courtroom. The open one, the unheld one, the one that looked like what he actually was underneath. 36 years of building walls to keep things safe. "You are the most practical idealist I have ever met," he said. Eleanor considered that. "I'll take it." It was a compliment. "I know," she said. "That's why I took it." The wagon moved through the late light, and Eleanor felt the truth of where she was settle into her, the way the best truths settled, not with drama, not with declaration, but with the quiet certainty of a thing that had been true for a while before you found the words for it. She was home. Mrs. Gruber had known the hearing was today. She had not asked about it, and she had not waited by the gate because she was not a woman who performed anxiety. But when the wagon pulled into the yard and Eleanor stepped down and walked toward the house, Mrs. Gruber appeared in the doorway with her apron on and her hands folded and she looked at Eleanor's face with the careful attention of a woman who had been reading people for 50 years. "Well," she said. "We won," Eleanor said. Mrs. Gruber nodded once, turned back into the kitchen. Eleanor followed her in and found that the kitchen table had been set properly with the good dishes and the 2 candles Mrs. Gruber reserved for occasions, and something in the oven that smelled like the venison stew she made only when she thought a meal needed to be more than food. Eleanor looked at the table. "You knew we would win," she said. "I knew you would fight until you did," Mrs. Gruber said without turning from the stove. "That is not the same thing, but it is close enough to prepare a good supper for." Eleanor stood in the kitchen doorway and felt something move through her chest that she couldn't have described cleanly, a rush of warmth and gratitude for this stout, unsentimental German woman who had looked at her on the first day with professional wariness, and within a week had started leaving coffee on the desk when Eleanor worked late, as though the act of leaving it were something she'd been doing for years. "Thank you," Eleanor said, "for all of it, not just tonight." Mrs. Gruber turned from the stove and looked at her directly, which she didn't do often. "You made this house into something again," she said. "It needed to be." She turned back to the stew. Eleanor sat down at the table and let herself be taken care of, which was not something she had much practice with, and which she was finding late in her 31st year was a skill worth acquiring. Cole came in from the barn 40 minutes later. He had taken care of the horses first. Of course he had. Eleanor thought that was exactly who he was, and he sat down at the table with the look of a man who had shed something heavy and hadn't quite gotten used to the new weight yet. Mrs. Gruber served the stew and bread and then disappeared with the efficiency of a woman who understood that some evenings were not for 3. They ate. At some point Cole said, "Henderson's wife is going to have her baby in the next 2 weeks." "I know," Eleanor said. "I've already spoken with Doc Paris about being available." Cole looked at her. "You arranged that?" "Babies don't wait for convenient timing," Eleanor said. "I wanted to know the plan was in place." He shook his head slightly. Not an exasperation in something that looked closer to wonder, the way a person looked at something they couldn't quite believe was real. "I want to talk about the wedding," he said. Eleanor set down her fork. "All right." "Not a large one," Cole said. "I don't—" He paused, choosing carefully. "I don't want it to be a performance. For the town or for anyone. I want it to mean what it means." "Agreed," Eleanor said immediately. "Small. Here, if that's possible. The people who matter. Fitch, Mrs. Gruber, Henderson and his wife, a few of the hands." He paused. "Margaret, if you're willing." Eleanor looked at him. "You want to invite Margaret?" "She gave us her letters," Cole said. "She didn't have to. She knew what it might cost her." He held Eleanor's gaze. "And she told me a year ago, when I was in one of my worst stretches, that I needed to stop running my life like a man who'd given up on the good parts of it." His voice was level without sentimentality, stating fact. "She was right. I didn't take it well at the time, but she was right." Eleanor thought about Margaret Caldwell, the composed nod in the courtroom, the genuine conflict on the boardwalk, the courage it took to hand over those letters when she had more to lose from it socially than anyone else in the room. "Invite her," Eleanor said. Cole nodded. Then, 2 weeks. 2 weeks is fine. "The preacher in town." "I'll speak to him," Eleanor said. "I was going to—" "I know," she said. "But I'll be in town Thursday to follow up with Fitch on the federal referral paperwork, and it's simpler if I do it then." She picked up her fork again. "You regrade the north drainage while I'm gone. Johnson said it needs attention before the spring rains." A pause. "I wasn't done talking about the wedding," Cole said. "We can talk about the drainage too," Eleanor said mildly. Cole looked at her across the table with that expression, the open one, the real one, and shook his head, and for the second time that day, Eleanor saw him smile. Not the brief, crooked thing she'd seen in the first week, The full one. The one that changed his whole face. "All right," he said. "The drainage." They talked about the drainage, and then about the school site, and then about Henderson's baby, and whether to hire a second cook to help Mrs. Gruber and the Denver supply contract renewal that was coming up in July. They talked about the ranch the way two people talked about something that belonged to both of them, without calculation, without roles, without either of them performing a version of themselves for the other's benefit. Eleanor clearing the plates after thought, "This is what I came for." Not the hearing, not the victory, not even the specific solid reality of Cole Whitaker across a supper table. This. The ordinary weight of a shared life already underway, already real, already something she would fight to keep. The letter from Warren Aldous arrived 4 days later. Not through a lawyer this time, not through a writer or a telegraph, through the postal service addressed to both of them, Mr. Cole Whitaker and Miss Eleanor Bennett. Whitaker Ranch, Willow Creek, Wyoming territory, in Aldous' own hand, which Fitch confirmed when Eleanor brought it to him. It was not what she expected. It was 2 paragraphs. The first paragraph acknowledged the Commission's decision without conceding any wrongdoing. Careful legal language that said nothing and preserved everything. The second paragraph was different. "I have been informed that a federal review of my business operations has been initiated, based in part on evidence submitted during your recent hearing. I am fully prepared to cooperate with that review. I would suggest, however, that both parties consider that a prolonged legal process serves no one's immediate interests, and that a negotiated resolution to outstanding disputes might prove more efficient for all concerned. I am open to discussion." Eleanor read it twice. Then she looked at Fitch. "He's scared," she said. "He's positioning," Fitch said. "There's a difference. He can be both." She set the letter on Fitch's desk. "What does a negotiated resolution mean in practice?" "It could mean financial settlements to the families he displaced," Fitch said carefully. "It could mean voluntary transfer of improperly acquired properties back to their original holders. It could mean—" He paused. "It could mean he's willing to make things right on paper and in practice in exchange for the federal investigation proceeding with his cooperation rather than his opposition." Eleanor absorbed that. "The families." "Yes, the Dodd estate, the 2 ranches Carlyle mentioned. If he makes those whole—" "That would be significant," Fitch said. "More significant arguably than a federal prosecution that could take years and might not result in full restitution." Eleanor looked at Cole. Cole had been standing by the window reading the letter, and he set it down now and looked back at her with the expression of a man doing the math on something that had no clean answer. "We'd be negotiating with him," Cole said. "A man who contaminated my water supply and cut my fence and tried to use your past against you." "Yes," Eleanor said. "We would." "That sits badly." "I know it does." She held his gaze. "It sits badly with me too. But the question isn't whether it sits badly. The question is, what outcome actually helps the most people?" A pause. "If we push for full federal prosecution, and it takes 4 years, and the families see nothing until the end of that, if they see anything, versus a negotiated settlement in which they get their land or a fair financial equivalent within the year." Cole was quiet. "I'm not saying he deserves the easier path," Eleanor said. "I'm saying the families deserve the better outcome." Cole looked at her for a long moment. "You've already decided." "I've already thought it through," Eleanor said. "You decide." "No." He shook his head. "We decide. That's how this works now." Eleanor felt the weight of that "we" again, the word that had stopped being an effort, the word that was just the shape of how things were. "Then I think we respond," she said. "We tell him any negotiated resolution must include full restitution to every displaced family, documented and legally binding. The federal examination continues regardless, and if his cooperation isn't genuine and complete, we withdraw from negotiation immediately and let the examination proceed without us." Cole looked at Fitch. "Can we structure it that way?" "I can have the terms drafted by Friday," Fitch said. "Do it," Cole said. He picked up his hat from the desk. Eleanor. He looked at her. I want to be clear about something. Whatever Aldous does or doesn't do in that negotiation, the federal examination continuing is not negotiable. He does not get to make himself safe from consequences. He gets to make the families whole. Those are two different things. Yes, Eleanor said. They are. Make sure that's in the terms, Cole told Fitch. Prominently, Fitch confirmed. Cole put on his hat. I'll be outside, he said with the manner of a man who needed air and movement, and the frank simplicity of physical work, to process something that had too many layers for a lawyer's office. Eleanor watched him go. Fitch said quietly, He's a good man. I know, Eleanor said. That's why it matters to him so much. The negotiation with Aldous took 3 weeks. Eleanor was present for every session. Not as a witness, as a participant sitting beside Fitch, reviewing every draft of every term, asking the questions Fitch anticipated and the ones he didn't. Aldous's lawyers were good. They were very good. They worked hard to soften the restitution language, to introduce ambiguity into timelines, to create exit provisions that would allow Aldous to comply in form while evading substance. Eleanor caught every one. She developed a reputation in those 3 weeks in the Cheyenne offices, where the sessions were held, that spread through the legal community of the territory with the particular speed of professional gossip. More than once, she caught the Aldous lawyers looking at her with expressions that had started as condescension and traveled through surprise and landed somewhere in the vicinity of wary respect. On the second week during a recess, one of them, the youngest, a sharp-eyed man named Presswick, who had clearly been told Eleanor was not the real attorney and had spent 2 sessions revising, that opinion, stopped beside her in the hallway and said, "Where did you train?" "I didn't," Eleanor said. "I paid attention." Presswick looked at her. "You should have trained." "Perhaps," Eleanor said. "But then I might have missed some of the things I learned by paying attention." She walked back into the session room. By the end of the 3rd week, the terms were as close to what she and Fitch had drafted as Aldous's lawyers were capable of producing. The restitution was real. The timelines were binding. The federal examination was explicitly preserved, its scope unchanged, its independence guaranteed by language that Fitch had spent 48 hours perfecting. Aldous himself was present at the final signing. Eleanor had seen him only in described terms before Fitch's careful characterizations, Gerald's fearful accounting the weight of his name in every document she'd spent 2 months examining. In person, he was not what she expected. He was not large or loud or physically imposing. He was a slim man in his early 50s with a quiet manner and precise movements, the kind of man who had learned long ago that controlled stillness was more intimidating than display. He looked at Eleanor when the final papers were on the table. Direct, assessing the look of a man who was used to understanding his opposition and was working on her. "Miss Bennett," he said, "you've been formidable." "Thank you," Eleanor said, without warmth but without hostility. "I learned from good source material." He looked at her for a moment. Then he signed the papers. It was not a defeat exactly from where he sat. She understood that. He was containing the damage, preserving what he could, making the calculation that strategic retreat was better than prolonged exposure during a federal examination. He was not broken. He was not finished. But 3 families were getting their land back. The Dodd estate would be settled in favor of its rightful heirs. And the federal examination would continue with his cooperation, and a complete documentary record that meant he would never again be able to operate in this territory with the impunity of a man who believed no one was paying attention. It was not justice in any pure sense. It was better than nothing. It was substantially better than nothing. Eleanor signed her name as witness. Her handwriting was neat, and even the same compact hand she'd used on every document since arriving in Wyoming, and she set down the pen and looked at what she had written and thought about a boarding house room in St. Louis, and the weight of staying silent, and the specific hard-won cost of speaking up. It was worth it, she thought, every bit of it. She told Cole that night. They sat in the kitchen, their kitchen she thought it now, without the qualifier, without the careful hedge of "for now" or "temporarily." And she went through the terms, and he listened and asked 3 precise questions that got to the heart of the 3 things he'd been most concerned about, and she answered all 3. When she finished, Cole was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "The Henderson baby was born this morning." Eleanor looked up from her papers. "What?" "While you were in the signing session, Doc Paris was there." He paused. "A girl. They're naming her Ellie." Eleanor went very still. "Henderson said his wife picked it," Cole said. "She said it was the name of the woman who made sure Doc Paris was available." Eleanor looked down at the table. She breathed. She was not generally a woman who cried easily. She had trained herself out of it in her mid-20s as a matter of survival, because tears in professional situations cost women things that the same tears cost men nothing. But something about this specific thing on this specific evening, after 3 weeks of Aldis's lawyers and document language, and the long grinding work of making justice happen in the real world, where it was never clean and never came free. Something about a baby named Ellie, because her father's employer had made sure help was there when help was needed. She pressed her fingers against her eyes for a moment. Cole said nothing. He did not make it into something demonstrative. He poured coffee and set it near her elbow and sat back down, and that was all. "I want to see them tomorrow," Eleanor said when she trusted her voice. "I'll take you in the morning," Cole said. She picked up the coffee cup. "And then I need to speak to the preacher about our wedding. We said 2 weeks and we're at 3. "We've been busy," Cole said mildly. "We're always going to be busy," Eleanor said. "That's not a reason to delay the things that matter." She looked at him across the table. "Next Saturday. The preacher, the people we said here at the ranch." "Agreed." Cole looked at her with the open expression that she had come to understand was his version of everything he felt that he didn't know how to put into words yet. "Agreed," he said. The wedding was on a Saturday in late May. The morning started early, because on Whitaker Ranch mornings always started early, and Eleanor had never been the kind of woman who spent her wedding day doing nothing but preparing for it. She went over the Denver supply contract renewal with Cole. At breakfast it had come in the previous day, and the terms were good, better than the Cheyenne arrangement had ever been. And then she went to help Mrs. Gruber with the food, and then she changed into the dress she had ordered from a seamstress in town 6 weeks before. It was not white. Eleanor had no interest in white. It was a deep blue-green, the color of the Wyoming sky at the hour before sunset, and it fit her exactly, because the seamstress had come to the ranch twice to get the measurements right, and Mrs. Gruber had looked at it when Eleanor put it on and said, "Yes, that is correct," which from Mrs. Gruber was the highest possible endorsement. The ceremony was in the front room, because the front room had the best light and the most space, and Mrs. Gruber had arranged flowers from the kitchen garden in a way that managed to be both practical and beautiful, which was, Eleanor thought, exactly the right approach for Whitaker Ranch. Fitch was there. Henderson and his wife who had brought the baby. 6 of the hands who had been at the ranch longest. The 2 families from the displaced operations who had come because Cole had personally invited them, and because Eleanor had, in the weeks since the settlement, helped them begin the paperwork to recover their properties. Margaret Caldwell in a dove-gray dress, composed and genuine, in a way that had nothing complicated in it anymore. And Gerald Horn. Eleanor had not expected Gerald. He stood near the back, and when she looked at him before the ceremony began, he looked at her with the expression of a man who had driven a long way to be present at something he felt he owed a witness to. She nodded at him. He nodded back. Cole stood at the front of the room in a good coat and his cleanest boots, and the expression of a man who had thought about this moment a great deal, and was now in it, and finding it was different from the thinking. He looked at Eleanor when she came to stand beside him, and she looked back, and the preacher said the words, and they said their own. Eleanor had not planned her vows in advance. She had resisted the impulse which was unlike her. She planned everything. She had been planning things her whole life as a matter of survival. But something had told her to leave this open, to find out what she actually meant in the moment of meaning it. She stood beside Cole Whitaker in the ranch house he had built alone, and she said, "I came here looking for a place where I could arrive as just a person, before anyone decided what I was. I found something better than that. I found a place where what I was turned out to be exactly what was needed." I found a man who asked me what I thought and listened to the answer, and who showed me that strength and trust were not opposites. She held his eyes. I didn't come looking for love, but love turned out to be the most practical thing that ever happened to me, because it made me better at every single thing I do. I am yours, Cole. Completely. For all of it. Cole was quiet for a moment after she finished. The room was very still. Then he said in the direct, undecorated way of a man who had worked his whole life to earn the right to mean what he said. I spent a long time believing that keeping things at a distance was the same as keeping them safe. You came here and made me see that the things worth having don't stay safe when you keep them at a distance. They just stay far away. He paused. You are the most real person I have ever known. You don't pretend. You don't perform. You just are completely, exactly what you are, and you make everything around you better for it. He held her gaze. I am not the same man I was before you stepped off that stagecoach. I'm better. And I intend to spend the rest of my life making sure you know I understand what that cost you and what it's worth. Someone in the room made a quiet sound. Eleanor didn't look to see who. The preacher said the final words. They were married. Cole kissed her brief, warm reel entirely his, and the room filled with the sound of people who had been through something together, celebrating the fact that it had come to this. Mrs. Gruber in the back blew her nose, then immediately looked at anyone who had noticed as though daring them to comment. Nobody commented. The reception was in the kitchen, and the dining room, and eventually the yard because the day was warm, and the food was plentiful, and people who had been careful strangers for months found they had a great deal to say to each other now that the pressure was off. Margaret found Eleanor on the porch in the late afternoon when the gathering had softened into small conversations and children running and the comfortable noise of people who have stopped performing for each other. Congratulations, Margaret said. She said it simply and meant all of it. Thank you, Eleanor said, for the letters. I know what it cost. It didn't cost as much as I expected, Margaret said. That's the thing about doing the right thing. You always expect it to be more expensive than it is. She was quiet for a moment. He's happy. I've known Cole Whitaker for 6 years, and I have never seen him happy. I wanted you to know I can see that. Eleanor looked at her. Are you all right? Margaret's composure didn't crack, but something behind it softened something human and slightly tired and entirely genuine. I will be, she said. I've been more than all right before, and I'll be more than all right again. A brief, real smile. I just needed to say it. She went back inside. Gerald found her 20 minutes later near the fence at the edge of the yard, where the noise of the gathering was a comfortable distance away. I'll be going back to St. Louis next week, he said. What will you do there? He was quiet for a moment. I have a contact at the Federal Examiner's office. They're going to need someone who knows Aldis's operations from the inside, who can testify to the methodology. He paused. It's not an easy thing to go back and do. No, Eleanor said. It isn't. But it's the right thing. Yes, she said. It is. He looked at her. I know I don't have the right to ask for anything from you. But, she said, but I'm glad you didn't stay quiet in St. Louis. He said, I'm glad you filed that report. I know it hurt you. I know what it cost you. His voice was level without self-pity or self-justification. It's the reason I'm standing here today, instead of still being what I was when I arrived in this town. He paused. So, thank you for that. Eleanor looked at him for a long moment. Make your testimony count, she said. That's what it was for. He nodded. I will. He went back to the gathering. Eleanor watched him go and felt the particular complicated piece of seeing a thing play out to its right conclusion. Not the clean conclusion, not the uncomplicated one, but the true one with all its cost and consequence and hard-won worth intact. By evening the guests were gone, and the house was quiet in the specific way it got quiet after people left it warmer than usual, still holding the shape of the afternoon. Cole was in the yard, and Eleanor found him there leaning on the fence at the edge of the yard, with his face turned toward the western sky, where the last light was going down in long, slow sheets of amber and rose. She stood beside him. Neither of them said anything for a while. The ranch settled around them in its evening sounds, cattle moving, horses in the barn, the distant sound of the creek. The sounds Eleanor had learned over the past 2 months, the way you learned the particular sounds of a place that was yours. The school, Cole said. I was thinking we could break ground in June, before it gets too hot. We'll need lumber, Eleanor said. I'll write to the Denver supplier. They carry building materials. Henderson said 3 of the hands want to help build it on their off days. Eleanor turned to look at him. You already asked them. I mentioned it, Cole said. He kept his eyes on the sunset. They volunteered. She looked at his profile in the evening light, the weathered jaw, the slight narrowing of his eyes that she'd learned was not suspicion, but focus, the particular set of his mouth that meant he was thinking about something he cared about. She had come to know this face the way she knew the account books and the lease clauses and the kitchen with the good morning light, thoroughly, with the specific accumulated knowledge that came from paying attention every day. Cole, she said. He turned to look at her. I want to tell you something, she said. And I need you to just let me say it without making it practical. He waited. I was 31 years old, and I had been called too old for so long I had started to believe it was a fact rather than an opinion. I had been called too plain and too independent and too much and not enough in so many combinations by so many people that I had built a very careful version of myself that didn't need anyone to tell her she was right or good or wanted. She held his gaze. I didn't think I was lonely. I thought I had made my peace with being alone. And I thought that was enough, and I was wrong about both of those things. Cole was very still. I am not lonely anymore, Eleanor said. Not because of the ranch or the work or the hearing or any of the practical things, though I love all of them. Because of you. She paused. Because you looked at me and saw exactly what I was and decided that was what you wanted. Without conditions, without the version you'd have preferred. Just me. She stopped. That is the thing I could not have planned for, and it is the best thing that has ever happened to me. Cole looked at her for a long moment. His hand found hers on the fence rail. His fingers closed around hers, the same unhurried certainty with which he did everything that mattered, the same complete quality of a man who did not commit to things part way. Eleanor, he said. She waited. You know what the whole town called you when you got off that stage, he said. I know, she said. They were looking at the wrong thing, he said. They were looking at your age and your dress and what they thought they knew about women who came west on mail-order arrangements. They looked at every single thing except the one thing that mattered. He held her gaze. I looked at you, and I saw someone who was exactly what she said she was. No pretense, no performance, just you. He paused. I haven't had many things in my life I was certain about. I was certain about you by the second day. I just needed time to admit it. Eleanor looked at him. The Wyoming sky above them was enormous and full of the first stars, and Whitaker Ranch held steady around them in the evening quiet. And Eleanor Bennett, who had arrived in this territory with one suitcase, and more determination than she had any right to, was exactly where she had always been going, even when she hadn't known the direction. You took the water trough as evidence, she said. I want you to know, that's when I knew. Cole looked at her. The drainage slope. The drainage slope, she confirmed. When you took it seriously, immediately, without making me explain why it mattered. She shook her head slightly. I had spent years explaining why things mattered to men who had already decided they didn't. You just acted on it, because I said it was worth acting on. It was worth acting on, Cole said. You were right. I know, Eleanor said. That's the point. He looked at her for one more moment, and then he laughed a real full laugh, unheld the laugh of a man who had been carrying too much for too long and had finally set it down. And Eleanor laughed with him in the Wyoming evening, with the stars coming up and the ranch settling into its night sounds around them. When the laughter quieted, they stood in the comfortable silence that had always been the truest language between them. Cole's hand still holding hers on the fence rail. The warmth of it, steady and certain. The town of Willow Creek had looked at Eleanor Bennett stepping off a stagecoach with one suitcase and seen a woman who was too old, too plain, and too proud. They had seen everything except what she actually was. She was the woman who read every subclause, who fixed the accounting errors nobody had noticed, who found the water contamination on day 4 and the reversion clause on day 11 and the pattern of 9 years of fraud in the 3 weeks after that. She was the woman who sat across from Warren Aldis's lawyers and caught every piece of softened language and held the line on every term that mattered. She was the woman who made sure Doc Paris was available when Henderson's wife needed him, and who would break ground on a school in June, and who had turned a house that had been holding its breath for 3 years back into something that breathed. She was not what the town had decided she was on the day she arrived. She was considerably more. And Cole Whitaker, the man who had built everything alone and believed that was strength, stood beside her in the evening light of his own ranch. As a man who had finally learned the difference between strength and solitude, between safety and distance, between enduring and living. The woman they had mocked had become the woman who changed everything. And the cowboy who thought he needed nothing had discovered the one truth that his acres and his cattle and his hard-won fortune had never been able to teach him on their own. The greatest thing a person could build was not land or wealth or reputation. It was the life you made with someone who saw you clearly, chose you deliberately, and stood beside you, not behind, not ahead, but exactly beside through every hard and beautiful thing the world sent your way. That was what Eleanor Bennett had come west to find, and that was exactly what she had,